Welcome to the 2024 Brisbane Anzac Day Parade. I'm Craig Zonka. Today we gather to pay tribute to the Anzac legacy, forged on the beaches of Gallipoli 109 years ago. We talk about those enduring qualities of courage and mateship, and the sacrifices made by the men and women who've served the country. And we say thank you to those who've come before us and the thousands who continue to serve in the Army, Navy and Air Force. We share their stories so they are never forgotten. Stories like that of Keith Payne, Australia's oldest living recipient of the Victoria Cross, our highest military honour. A war hero, Keith was recognised by his actions in the Vietnam War. Wounded himself, he rescued 40 injured soldiers while under enemy attack. Like most who've seen the atrocities of war, Keith doesn't like to talk about it. But he spoke to the ABC about that fateful night 55 years ago and the work he still does for veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder.
I didn't consider I was risking my life. I considered I was doing the job that I was sent there to do and the one that I volunteered to do.
Warrant Officer Keith Payne received this nation's highest military honour, the Victoria Cross, while serving as a Special Forces Advisor in Kon Province.
We were holding them. I was using grenades and there was rifle fire and machine gun fire going at the enemy. Just got too heavy because the enemy started to close in on our right flank. So we had to withdraw. I decided to try and get some of the wounded off the hill. I bumped into two of the enemy. We engaged. I got out.
Warrant Officer Payne continually exposed himself to enemy fire while firing back and throwing grenades at the North Vietnamese. He received shrapnel wounds to his hands and arms. But you stayed on to cover that withdrawal and gather up the wounded from your company and fought your way back through enemy lines.
I was Johnny on the spot. I think I had probably the most training and the most capable there of doing what had to be done.
Were you frightened?
I was being careful. I was planning all the time. I had too much to think about to be frightened. I can remember going into the headquarters. One of the amazing things happened that I'll always remember. The command was given, gentlemen up, and they all saluted. The fellow that gave the order said, "We have a soldier in our midst." That was it. So I was called a soldier. Pride is not mine. Pride is for the people that were with me on that night. When the press thing was over, and my mate Ray Simpson, of course, Simo was waiting at the front door. And he grabbed hold of me and he said, "Come on, mate." And he reached down, and he said, "Here, have a beer." Time went by and I'm starting to feel sort of lost. I was being a bit of a bloody menace in the house. It was post-traumatic stress.
Little things can crop up and all of a sudden it'll come to the fore. You may have thought if you'd lost it, but all of a sudden, there it is, you know. I just used to treat the day as the day came, treated the day as he was. If our love for one another hadn't been as strong as it is, I probably wouldn't have lasted.
I had to get gear out of the shed. I still have it. Nobody that's ever had post-traumatic stress will ever get away from it.
The old saying is, once a soldier, always a soldier. As far as he's concerned, that's quite a true saying. If it's anything to do with the vet, he'll be right there to help him as much as he can, where he can, when he can.
Congratulations
We know you're doing a bloody tremendous job. A little bit different to ours.
After all these generations, after all these campaigns, 2 world wars, nothing has been done to try and calm, cure, to a certain extent, people with post-traumatic stress and get them back into the workforce. They are waiting for somebody to do something, and their waiting sometimes overcomes them, and I'm afraid they take it upon themselves to finish life. We can't let it go another generation.
Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn.
Anzac Day, to all veterans, is a day for them to remember, celebrate the fact that they have made it home. A real big way to say thank you is Anzac Day. And that's what the public do. It's a day to remember the people that gave their lives for the nation. God bless them.
What an incredible story from one of our most decorated soldiers, Victoria Cross recipient Keith Payne, on this Anzac Day 2024, and that beautiful love between him and his wife, Flo. The sun is shining as we look down Adelaide Street, right in the heart of the Brisbane CBD. Thousands have lined the streets, waving their Australian flags as we pay tribute to our proud military history here in southeast Queensland. We are, of course, home to the Army's 7th Brigade at Gallipoli Barracks at Enoggera, the country's largest Air Force base at Amberley towards Ipswich, and the Navy's HMAS Moreton. Joining me in commentary is retired Commander Peter Tedman, who served for close to 5 decades in the Australian Navy and in Special Forces. Peter, welcome and good morning.
Beautiful day. We've been blessed with this very Queenslandish weather.
After a couple of years of rain on our parade on Anzac Day, and what goes through your mind in 2024?
Just how much of an honour it is to march the streets, see all the people standing alongside, smiling and waving. It's just such a great feeling.
As we see the Queensland Police Service mounted contingent lead the parade today, and followed by the riderless horse, which you'll see the reverse boots of. It symbolises fallen soldiers and is known as the Lone Charger. And let's just take a moment to reflect on the Australian servicemen who paid the ultimate sacrifice in the past year. Lance Corporal Jack Fitzgibbon died in a parachuting accident in a Special Forces training exercise at Richmond RAAF base in Sydney last month. He was part of the Special Forces 2nd Commando Regiment, and during exercise Talisman Sabre last year, a Taipan helicopter crashed off the Queensland coast, claiming the lives of Captain Daniel Lyon, Corporal Alexander Nags, Lieutenant Maxwell Nugent and Warrant Officer Class 2 Joseph Laycock. Their tragic deaths highlight that great risk Defence First personnel are exposed to, even during training. They're a true example of the old saying that the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. The New Zealand flag and Australian flags coming into view now, and that sums up what Anzac Day is all about, that legacy that was built on those beaches of Gallipoli 109 years ago, and the Australian Army Band in Brisbane, who often provide musical support to regal, vice-regal, state and ceremonial activities. And concert format, the band frequently perform for the public, has even done so on ABC Radio Brisbane over the years, performing a vast variety of musical styles, ranging from traditional military music, like you'll hear today, to contemporary popular music such as jazz and rock. They set the beat for the start of the Anzac Day Parade 2024. And I'd like to welcome into commentary as well Flight Lieutenant Greg Hinks from the Royal Australian Air Force. Greg, thanks for joining us this Anzac Day.
Thanks, Craig. It's great to be here. Beautiful day for Anzac Day Parade here through Brisbane.
We'll see your colleagues soon lead the serving contingent of forces down Adelaide Street. But let's just take a moment to listen to the Australian Army Band. And on the dais, you see the Governor of Queensland, Dr. Jeanette Young, and Kerry Gallagher, the Chairman of the Parade Organising Committee. And Greg, as we see the flags of Australia and New Zealand, tell us about who's leading the parade today.
So today's parade commander is Group Captain Melissa Nielsen. She's the Chief of Staff for the Combat Support Group, which is based at RAAF Base Amberley. The Deputy Parade Commander is the Warrant Officer for Headquarters of Combat Support Group, Warrant Officer Mark Devers. Both very well-respected members of the Royal Australian Air Force based at Amberley.
And even a reminder of yesteryear with the historical troop behind the flags of the uniforms of yesteryear, along with nursing uniforms as well, honouring the Baker Island nurses back in 1942 during World War II. And World War II veterans and family of veterans this year, marking, of course, the 80th anniversary of the D-Day landings in the Battle of Normandy, the turning point in the war against Nazi Germany. And there, in centre screen, you see 100-year-old Cynthia Clifford. Cynthia enlisted as a 20-year-old in 1943. Let me just share a bit of her story. She served as a heavy anti-air gunner in Western Australia. Cynthia's father, Thomas Cadd, and his 4 brothers all served in the First World War. 2 of his brothers, Walter and George, saw action in Gallipoli. They all returned home. Cynthia's husband, Kenneth, was deployed to Borneo as a signaller during World War II. And Cynthia's uncle, Royce Woodhead, was a member of the 1st Anzac Imperial Camel Corps. The medals on her right are her father's and her husband's. And marching with Cynthia is a large contingent of her family, including 5 of her 6 children, Cole, Noel, Cheryl, Rosalind and Valerie. Cynthia was planning to march for the first time with her best friend Muriel, who also served during World War II, but due to unforeseen circumstances, Muriel can't be in the march today, but we know she's watching from home. So from all of us here at the ABC, Muriel, we wish you all the very best. And now, let's pay tribute to Legacy Brisbane, one of Australia's oldest and most trusted charities. The story of Legacy has its origins in the foxholes of Pozières in France, where one dying digger is said to have asked his mate to look after his missus and kids back home. Realising the dire circumstances of the tens of thousands of veterans, widows and children left behind, those who returned from World War I set out to help them. The rest, as they say, is history. Legacy Brisbane has cared for the families of the fallen in Brisbane since 1928. It's remarkable work, Peter Tedman, that Legacy get to do each and every day.
Absolutely, Craig. It is a great endorsement for Legacy when you see so many of the kids of fallen soldiers and sailors and airmen marching. Legacy do such a great job. It's
currently fundraising for the new Legacy house to be built near the Greenslopes Hospital. And just want to make mention of the Run Army. I don't know if you saw that event held last weekend. It's grown over the past few years to raise more than $500,000 for Legacy. This year it raised another $90,000. Organisers are hoping to expand the effort to support charities and first responders and their families. And you'll see, of course, many marching with Legacy with the medals over their right chest, signalling that they are in memory of their fallen ancestors. Australian War Widows Queensland provide friendship, support and assistance to close to 70,000 families around the country. The first Queensland branch was established in Toowoomba in 1947, and you can see the Kookaburra as the association's logo on their banner. And Greg Hinks, from your perspective, and we'll see a contingent from Amberley march soon, what goes through your mind on Anzac Day?
I think for me it's really remembering those that came before me, and particularly as a serving member, being able to pay respect to them, but also reflect on my own service and the service of my friends. So,
and what was the catalyst to you to sign up?
I have always had a passion for aviation, and I was involved with the Air Force Cadets for many years, and the opportunity came up to join Air Force, and it was a no-brainer, really. It was something that I was particularly passionate about, and also giving back to my country.
And for you, Peter Tedman, I know your family has a long history in the military, all the way back to the World Wars.
Absolutely, yeah. My dad.
You might have just been able to hear in the background Super Hornet flying overhead from the Royal Australian Air Force.
Perfect timing.
It's quite the noise when you're standing by the street here beside Brisbane Town Hall and looking down Adelaide Street. But you were talking about World War II.
My dad, yeah.
And your father,
well,
Peter, said...
He joined in 41 as part of the deployment. He deployed to Malaysia as part of the 2nd 26th Battalion. His service was cut short by a gunshot wound to his head. Fortunately for him, his brother was part of that unit as well and managed to get him to the field hospital and then back to Singapore. And subsequently, he managed to leave Singapore on about the second last evacuation ship before the surrender. Made it home, and then he had a glorious son.
Goodness,
I know.
It's incredible that level of military history for your family. It's run strong, and I know was part of the catalyst for you signing up. And
absolutely,
we'll talk more about what you did during your close to 5 decades of service with the Australian Navy. The Queensland Police Service pipes and drums. And you might just be able to see the banner of the Defence Service nurses, the Royal Australian Army Nursing Corps Association and the Australian Army Medical Women's Service. A special anniversary for the Defence nurses this year, as nurses have been serving with the Australian Defence Force since 1899, before Federation, thus providing 125 years of service to the nation. The Army Nursing Service itself was raised in 1902 and has served in all theatres of war. And this year's march, they're being led by 3 currently serving nurses representing each of the services, now Tri-Service, Army, Navy and Air Force. The banner being carried is also acknowledging and remembering the massacre of 21 Australian nurses at Raji Beach, Banker Island in 1942. The Women's Royal Australian Army Corps Association, this unit was formed in 1951 to help boost numbers post-World War II and during the Korean War. They first served overseas in Singapore. The Corps was disbanded in 1984 as female soldiers began to be integrated into the Army at large. And the Women's Royal Australian Air Force Association, Queensland, marching towards the dais this morning. The Women's Auxiliary Australian Air Force was raised in March of 1941 and had the largest contingent of serving women. It was disbanded in December of 1947, but with the undeniable value of women to the service, the Women's Royal Australian Air Force welcomed its first recruits in 1951, but it wasn't until 1977, I should say, that the members of the Women's Royal Australian Air Force were transferred to the Royal Australian Air Force. And of course, it wouldn't be Anzac Day without the New Zealand contingent, as we mark, of course, the anniversary of the landings at Gallipoli. More than 2,700 New Zealand soldiers were killed during the Gallipoli campaign. That's roughly 1 in 6 of the New Zealanders who served there. And Commander Peter Tedman, can I just use this quote from German Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, who said, "If I had to take hell, I would use the Australians to take it and the New Zealanders to hold it."
That does say it all, doesn't it, Craig? And an interesting fact that supports that, New Zealand's Flying Officer Lloyd Trigg is the only person to have been awarded the Victoria Cross based solely on the evidence provided by the enemy.
That's extraordinary, isn't it?
Who would have believed it?
And from New Zealand, Captain Charles Upham is one of only 3 people and only the only combat soldier to have been awarded the Victoria Cross twice. Extraordinary achievements in battle. The post-World War II Veterans Banner now. For ADF and Allied services. And we see some dogs marching here. Well, I've more to talk about with the explosive detection dogs that are based at Gallipoli. Gallipoli Barracks, I should say. A little later when you see members of 7th Brigade march down Adelaide Street. And the Mackay North State High Band. This year is a very special milestone for this band. You'll see them a couple of times through the parade. It's their 30th successive year performing in Brisbane at the Anzac Day Parade. The band has grown to be one of the largest single school marching bands in Australia and was selected as the first civilian band to appear at the start of the parade and later with the youth organisations and state marshals at the end of the parade. Let's take a listen. Flight Lieutenant Greg Hinks. Your colleagues from RAAF Amberley making their way down.
Yes, the sea of blue here on Anzac Day. Leading the Air Force this year is Group Captain Stuart Manor, the Director of Logistics Capability Headquarters Combat Support Group. With him, Warrant Officer Liz Crean, the RAAF Amberley-based Warrant Officer, 23 Squadron, and Ensign Bearer is Flight Lieutenant Saif Iqbal from Headquarters Combat Support Group. So they are leading today's parade.
You mentioned Group Captain Stuart Matner. He also spent some time here in commentary of previous Anzac Day parades, and it just shows the size and scale of operations at Amberley has certainly expanded in recent years.
It is a massive base. When you go out there on any given day, the operations that are taking place are quite significant.
And tell us about some of the personnel marching here.
Well, starting up, we've got 23 Squadron, which is the City of Brisbane Squadron. It's our base squadron at RAAF Base Amberley, led by Senior Australian Defence Force Officer at RAAF Base Amberley, Wing Commander Tanya Evans, who's trained as an engineer in the Royal Australian Air Force. These days, 23 Squadron isn't a flying squadron, but the aviators look after the base operations for RAAF Base Amberley, which can include everything from physical training instructors to chefs, firefighters, and even our chaplains. The squadron has a very rich history, forming on the 3rd of May 1937 at RAAF Richmond, then moving to RAAF Station Archerfield in 1939, becoming the first Air Force squadron based in Queensland.
And can you tell me a little bit about these dogs that are marching with the Air Force today?
They are part of number 2 Security Forces Squadron, and they have a number of different roles throughout defence, from protection right through to all the usual stuff that they do.
And we're seeing the banner of 82 Wing come down Adelaide Street, right in the heart of the Brisbane CBD for the Anzac Day Parade 2024. Outline the work of 82 Wing, if you don't mind.
So number 82 Wing, that's our Air Combat and Electronic Attack Air Force Wing, coming under the control of Air Combat Group. So the wing operates, you would have seen the A18F Super Hornets fly past just before. They operate the Super Hornets of 1 Squadron, the EA-18G Growlers, the Electronic Attack aircraft flown by number 6 Squadron as well. It was formed in 1944. Number 82 Wing has operated a number of aircraft over the year, everything from the B-24 Liberator through to the Avro Lincolns, and since that time they've also operated the English Electric Canberra Bomber, seeing action in the Malayan emergency during the 50s and later deployed to Vietnam. But we of course know them for the F-111. That was probably one of the biggest aircraft that they flew.
Of course, the old dump and burn that would be part of River Fire each year. One squadron coming into view now.
And obviously they're the ones that were flying the 2 jets that did the fly past just before here at the Anzac Day Parade, led by Commanding Officer Wing Commander Sean Hamilton, number 1 Squadron, one of the longest histories in the Air Force. Now, Wing Commander Hamilton, following in the footsteps of the first Commanding Officer of 1 Squadron, then the Australian Flying Corps, Lieutenant Colonel E.H. Reynolds, the unit deploying to the Middle East with the BE-2 aircraft in 1916. So many aircraft. Obviously, the FA-18F Super Hornet these days, made famous by the movie Top Gun Maverick.
Of course. I thought there would have to be a Top Gun reference in there somewhere this morning, Greg Hinks.
There has to be, because, you know, they obviously used that aircraft for that movie.
A 6 Squadron we're seeing the banner of right now. They operate the Growler aircraft, don't they?
That's right. They're electronic attacks. So today, led by Commanding Officer Wing Commander Stephen Thornton. They formed in Parkhurst, England on the 15th of June 1917 as a flying training unit of the Australian Flying Corps. A really important part of Air Force. Obviously, we've got the Growlers, the EA-18 Growlers in 2017 rather. And obviously, they were replacing Super Hornets that moved to 1 Squadron. And prior to that, they also operated the F-111.
You might have noticed on the emblem the boomerang, and their motto is "We shall return." And Greg Hinks, as we mentioned, it's not just the fighter aircraft, but then also the C-17s who call Amberley home these days.
Absolutely. The C-17's a marvellous aircraft. I've had the pleasure of flying in a few of them over my years in Air Force, and it really is a pleasure to fly with number 36 Squadron. But coming up the street now is Headquarters 86 Wing. So what they do is they're marching with 33 Squadron here today with the wing under the command of Group Captain Stephen Moneypenny. The wing formed in 1947 and these days is responsible for the command, control and management of the KC-30A multi-role tank and transport, which essentially, I know it's a mouthful.
That is a mouthful, Greg.
Wow. And they also operate the C-17A Globemaster from 36 Squadron, both at RAAF Base Amberley. They also operate the 34 Squadron VIP aircraft, which is a Boeing business jet, and the Falcon 7X special purpose aircraft, and they use all that in the VIP operations.
I was going to say the Globemaster would be a bit different inside to some of those VIP jets operated by the RAAF.
A little bit.
They're marching to the beat set by the Brisbane Grammar School band, who have been a part of the Anzac Day parade for over 30 years. Of course, Brisbane Grammar School, based at Spring Hill in Brisbane. On ABC TV, this is the 2024 Anzac Day Parade. And the banner of 33 Squadron spells out that level of history dating back to World War II.
Absolutely. And look, you know, they these days operate our multi-role tank and transport, which essentially it's just an Airbus A330 able to refuel other Air Force aircraft in the air. They do this via a refueling boom system under the tail and also a pair of refueling pods under each wing. Now, the aircraft is still able to be used for transporting people as well, with room for 270 passengers on board the aircraft. So, and they often are taking defence members around the world. So it really is an important squadron.
And have you been in the air as they've been undertaking a refuelling operation?
It is a very impressive point of being in the air when they do that.
Because that's skill and mastery to make that happen.
When you're sitting in essentially an A330 and you look out the window and there's a Super Hornet being refueled, it is really an impressive sight.
We're just seeing the banner of 35 Squadron. With that logo from the Caribou days of Wallaby Airlines.
That's right, and the interesting thing about 35 Squadron, one of the only squadrons in the Air Force that actually had rotary wing back in the day as well, so they operated Caribous and Iroquois helicopters. Now today, 35 Squadron is led by Commanding Officer Wing Commander Mark Seary, also based at RAAF Base Amberley, and these days we operate the C-27J Spartan, which is a light tactical airlifter, often one of the first military aircraft you'll see into an area when there is a disaster, and often used for disaster relief.
That's 35 Squadron about to march past the Governor of Queensland, Dr. Jeanette Young. They'll be followed by 36 Squadron.
Just quickly on 35 Squadron, they were awarded the Duke of Gloucester Cup this year, which recognised them as the most proficient flying squadron in the Air Force for the last 12 months. So it's a great achievement.
Yeah, highly competitive, I think that award would be.
Absolutely. Our flying squadrons are very, very competitive. As you said, 36 Squadron are moving in, which is our heavy airlift squadron, operating the C-17A Globemaster 3, led by Wing Commander Scott Hyland. You would know, of course, this aircraft for its impressive fly past the river fire as well.
And for an aircraft of that size, I happen to be under the flight path for the river fire loop that they do, and the noise that is created underneath that is just extraordinary. And you think, how can an aircraft of that size be so manoeuvrable?
Oh, and that is the thing. It is amazing. Even being on board the aircraft while you're flying, just the manoeuvrability and the skill of the crews, from the air crew, the pilots up front, through to the load masters in the back, and even the maintenance crews who keep those aircraft running each and every day.
And involved in the evacuation of Kabul just a couple of years ago.
Correct, yeah.
And one of the pilots involved with that, literally a couple of weeks later on arriving back to Australia, was then flying as part of that river fire display. So it just shows the breadth of tasks that you may be asked to do when you sign up as a pilot in the Air Force.
Absolutely, and with 36 Squadron particularly, they do a particular exercise with the Americans and also the English called Global Dexterity. So we operate so that we can actually work together in a seamless team.
You can see some smiles on faces of the students from Mary McKill Catholic College based at Highfields, just outside of Toowoomba, and their drumline who are part of proceedings today.
So currently coming on screen is Headquarters Combat Support Group, which is the largest force element group in the Air Force, with just under 3,200 full-time personnel and an additional 1,800 reservists. With 3 wings and 24 individual units, Combat Support Group is joined by number 96 Wing, just coming up after it. But leading Headquarters Combat Support Group right now is the commanding officer of the Headquarters, Wing Commander Adam Hurrell.
And we can hear Mary MacKillop College Marching Band literally just beside our commentary position. Peter Tedman, you were almost being blown away for a second there.
Greg, just one question. The RAAF base Amler now must be known so much for its logistic support. It is such a huge ADF logistic hub now. It's not just the airbase, is it?
That's exactly right. You've got elements, there's even army elements on the base as well. There's a 9 field support battalion as well. So it really is a base where most military will come and work at some point.
Yeah, absolutely.
And coming into shot now, we see more members of the Royal Australian Air Force based at Amberley.
That's right. Following up, we had 96 Wing who operate the 14 permanent air bases and 2 contingency response bases around Australia, and also a squadron in Malaysia as well. And then Combat Support Coordination Centre, who have a team of subject matter experts who support operations and planning for Combat Support Group as well. And then following that, you'll see in the berets the 2 Security Forces Squadron, which was formed in 2013 when other Air Force security elements amalgamated into from number 2 Airfield Defence Squadron, retaining all battle honours, aviators in the unit, ground defence and security police specialists, and include Airfield Defence Guards, Air Force Police, Air Force Security, military working dog handlers, and airbase protection under the command of Wing Commander J. Nix.
Number 1 Combat Communications Squadron just marching down Adelaide Street past City Hall in the background, and responsible for the provision of communications and IT systems to support Air Force and Defence Force operations and exercises.
And they're a very important squadron within Air Force, formed on the 20th September 1965 as the Air Transportable Telecommunications Unit. Number 1 Combat Communications Squadron, definitely grown significantly over the years, from humble beginnings with 12 people in 1965 to the aviators we see here today.
12 people.
Yeah.
The banner of the Health Services Wing will just be coming into shot in a moment, comprising of the 1st Expeditionary Health Squadron, the 3rd Aeromedical Evacuation Squadron, and the Health Operational Conversion Unit.
Now, this wing is an absolute amazing. I've had a little bit to do with them only recently. The officer commanding is Group Captain John Rollo. Unfortunately, he can't march today. He's looking after the kids here at the parade while his wife marches. So he's a qualified doctor himself. But marching today, you'll see there doctors, nurses, medics and support personnel. And they've got these amazing facilities at RAAF Base Amberley for training, like the Blue Room, which is almost like a film set. It's amazing. They put on mixed reality and they're able to be in the back of a Hercules, a C-130J Hercules, and train as if they're in the aircraft. It really is amazing.
Well, a shout out to John today as he's watching on from home. And it shows, love can blossom within, whether it be the Air Force, the Army or the Navy for that matter.
Absolutely.
And we're seeing the first of the Air Force associations come into view now, including the number 23 Squadron Association, known as the City of Brisbane Squadron, of course. The banner lists the battle honours from New Guinea back in 1944 to the Markham Valley. Also the same year, Eastern Waters through the Second World War, the Pacific, theatres of war, and Borneo in 1945. And while on patrol over the approaches to the Brisbane River, 2 Wirraways conducted the first attack against an enemy submarine on the east coast of Australia. The squadron was deployed on combat operations in New Guinea in 1942. And then in 1945, the squadron continued land and maritime strike operations against Japanese forces with Liberator heavy bombers until the surrender. Of course, the squadron still operational today. We saw some of their serving members march earlier with the contingent from Amberley, Greg.
Absolutely, and these days it is the base squadron, so it looks after all logistics and operation of base support services.
And we need to make mention of Graham Mackelman, a reserve fighter pilot in the 50s, also remembered today as the TAA DC-9 captain, who was awarded the Star of Courage after an armed hijacker attempted to take control of his aircraft over the Brisbane CBD back in 1979. An unbelievable story. We're just seeing the banner of the RAAF's Airfield Defence Association of Australia.
Now, awarded the Ground Combat Badge by the Chief of the Air Force in 2014 for their role in all conflicts from World War I to present, the badge takes pride of place at the centre of the association banner. The Air Force Ground Defence of Airfields, originally established in 1929 and formed squadrons formed during World War II in the Pacific Campaign. Airfield Defence Guards were introduced in 1965 and activated for service in Vietnam, embedded in flying squadrons operating from bases in Vietnam. Their role was as a specialist ground defence force designed to stop all infiltrators getting into mortar or rocket range of air bases to prevent damage, injury or disruption to air combat operations.
A very needed element of the Defence Force.
And also many Airfield Defence Guards serve with 9 Squadron as helicopter door gunners and crewmen, often suffering casualties in that role.
We're seeing veterans and family members from Number 2 Squadron Association, formed in Egypt back in 1916, then sent to the Western Front in France and Belgium. Number 2 Squadron is the only Air Force squadron to have battle honours from 4 wars: World War I, World War II, the Malaysian Confrontation and the Vietnam War.
These days flying the E-7 Wedgetail.
Number 3 Squadron coming into view now, and just on their banner, the official badge shows a winged flaming grenade emblazoned with the French fleur-de-lis. The Latin motto, Operata Aperta, means secrets revealed, referring to that value of aerial reconnaissance, one of the important roles of the squadron in its early operational days, and also a sign to its capability in the modern-day Air Force.
And the squadron now equipped with the F-35 Lightning II Joint Strike Fighter and is based at Williamtown RAAF Base in Newcastle.
Number 9 Squadron Association. This squadron was formed in January of 1939, operating the Seagull Mark V and Walrus aircraft from Allied warships. The squadron was disbanded in 1989 when the RAAF transferred its battlefield helicopters to the Australian Army's aviation regiments.
Now, Number 9 Squadron only recently has just been reformed and will operate the Northrop Grumman MQ-4C Triton. The Triton is an uncrewed aerial system and will be based at RAAF Edinburgh in South Australia. It's only a few weeks ago the squadron standard was reactivated at Point Cook, ready for the arrival of the first Tritons. Number 9 Squadron will be part of the 92-wing surveillance and response group.
The Number 35 Squadron Association and the RAAF Transport Flight Vietnam. First squadron in, last squadron out, their banner reads. And 35 Squadron, an Air Force transport unit, formed in 1942, operated during World War II, transporting cargo and passengers around Australia, New Guinea and the Netherlands East Indies, equipped with a variety of aircraft, including the famous Douglas Dakota. It was disbanded after the war, but was reformed in the 1960s for service during the Vietnam War, flying transportation and resupply operations. The squadron also flew Iroquois helicopters, becoming the only squadron to have fixed and rotary wing aircraft. Of course, as you mentioned earlier, Greg, these days based out of Amberley, operating the Spartan, isn't it?
C-27J Spartan aircraft. Wallaby Airlines, we called them affectionately.
And Greg, I know with your role in the Air Force, you've also had the opportunity to do a little bit of work with the famous roulettes.
Yeah, so I've had the pleasure of doing a little bit of work, a little bit of commentary for some of their displays, and they really are a wonderful group of pilots who train our up-and-coming pilots in the PC-21 Pilatus aircraft. So it really is an amazing group of people.
And if you ever have the opportunity to go to an air show where you see that full range of RAAF planes on display,
yeah,
it really is a sight to behold. I know last year in Ipswich it was at Amberley. It was quite the day for the many thousands who attended.
Look, it really is a wonderful time to be. If you get an opportunity to go and have a look at some of our aircraft, it really is a great opportunity to get up close, because we've got everything from the Super Hornets at RAAF Base Amberley, the Growlers, the Spartans, the C-17s, the KC-30s. It really is a plethora of different sorts of aircraft.
And it seems as we see the Brisbane Pipe Band come into shot, making their way down Adelaide Street here in the heart of the Brisbane CBD for Anzac Day Parade 2024. Craig Zonka's my name. In commentary with me, Flight Lieutenant Greg Hinks from the Royal Australian Air Force. And you mentioned about the catalyst for you to sign up, that overall interest in aviation. Greg, when you think of what will happen next at Amberley Air Base. Expansion has been huge over the past 5 years and is slated to continue over the next few years as well, isn't it?
Oh, there's always expansion, particularly with Air Force. We've seen many changes over the years, and as technology changes, we will obviously see more and more of that happening.
We'll soon see the Navy start their trip down Adelaide Street. So, Greg Hinks, can we say thank you very much for joining us on Anzac Day 2024. We'll see you next year.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure being here.
And thanks for your service to the country.
Thank you.
Flight Lieutenant Greg Hinks joining us on ABC TV as we see the last of the RAAF associations, the Pathfinder Force. And what makes Anzac Day so special, Commander Peter Tedman, in my mind, is that want of people to show and pay tribute to their, whether it be brothers, sister, mum, dad, auntie, uncle, who have served in any of the forces. And you see that with medals displayed over the right side of their chest.
Absolutely, absolutely. I actually recently was in contact with Honours and Awards to see what medals my dad had so I could wear those on Anzac Day. And I was advised that they'd never been issued. So I actually got his original medals. And I'm still yet I couldn't believe that he'd never got them.
So never been issued?
Never been issued. So I got the originals with his name on the back and his number, service number. So, yeah, next year.
We're seeing a number of the associations representing Bomber Command. Squadrons marching together today, 460, 462, 463, 466 and 467 squadrons, with family members of the original squadron members marching in honour of their ancestors. And Bomber Command Remembrance Services taking place around Australia in June. This year marks the 80th anniversary of the Nuremberg raid, where 795 bombers, including 75 from 4 RAAF squadrons, targeted the industrial city of Nuremberg. It was Bomber Command's worst loss for a single raid during the entire World War II. 5 RAAF aircraft were lost, with 47 Australians killed. It's also 80 years since Bomber Command supported the D-Day landings. Bomber Command hit 10 coasted batteries, using close to 100 aircraft on each target the night before the landings, aiding that invasion's success. RAAF squadrons conducted a further 9 raids before the war in Europe came to an end. 460 Squadron flew more raids than any other Australian squadron, but also suffered heavy casualties. And as we see the contingent from HMAS Moreton make their way down the street for the parade in 2024, let me bring into commentary Warrant Officer Cole Scott from the Royal Australian Navy. Cole, welcome again.
Thanks, Craig. Great to be here.
Tell us who's leading the Navy contingent today.
Leading our contingent today is Lieutenant Matthew Murphy. He's our lead personnel officer for HMAS Moreton. Matthew's a local lad, grew up in the out northern suburbs of Brisbane.
And Peter Tedman, you've served with HMAS Moreton a couple of times.
A couple of times in the 80s as a Chief Petty Officer and then as CO in 2013 to 16. So, yeah, for a while. Isn't that uniform beautiful? Look at that.
Crisp and white.
You've almost got to put your sunnies on.
Yeah, where are they?
Where are they?
And, Cole, who's receiving the salute from the Navy?
That's Commander Apakatoa. She's a new commanding officer, just joined us in December last year. Of note for her is that she's the first Pacific Islander to take command of a naval station.
And give us a sense of the operations of HMAS Moreton.
Moreton is a mainly administration and logistics support base where we will help a lot of the ships that will come into port, especially if they're going to deploy overseas for humanitarian relief operations in times of need when they have like cyclones, tsunamis go through. But we're also just starting to branch out a little bit with our littoral watercraft, which are coming online. It's a very new process for us at this stage, but it's simply something to get more watercraft on the Brisbane River.
The Royal Australian Navy Band Queensland, made up solely from members who are naval reservists. They base themselves out of HMAS Moreton in Brisbane and represent the Navy throughout Queensland. The bandmaster is Simon Potter, who has deployed a number of times supporting Navy commitments overseas. And the Navy Women Association coming into view now. Established in World War II to free male sailors for sea service, the women in Royal Australian Navy initial enlistment was 14, but grew to over 3,000 by war's end, Cole.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. These are the ladies who actually allowed us initially to for men to go to sea, but also they supported us in their ways. And they've now been serving with us for nearly 40 years at sea.
And really, I guess, paved the way for women who are serving in the Navy today.
Absolutely, yes.
HMAS Hobart, HMAS Perth and HMAS Brisbane associations marching together. And there have been 3 Hobarts. The first a light cruiser that served in World War II, the second a guided missile destroyer that served in Vietnam and the Gulf War, and the third an air warfare destroyer. Spanish designed and built, it was brought out to Australia to have its weapon systems installed that incorporated state-of-the-art equipment.
That's right, Craig. And today we have some members from the HMAS Perth who actually were flown in for today's march. They've also spent some time with the cadets whilst they're up in Brisbane these last couple of days as well.
And of course the newest Brisbane, a Hobart-class destroyer itself, known affectionately as the Steel Cat, I'm told.
Yes, Steel Cat. They've also got some members who've come up to march with their contingent today as well.
As you can see with those crisp white uniforms you referred to earlier, Peter Tedman. And just on the Brisbane, I did note that earlier this year when returning from a 3-month deployment in the Indo-Pacific, that Brisbane was used to evacuate 4 members of the Bureau of Meteorology from Willis Island when they were directly in the path of Tropical Cyclone Jasper.
Yes, they're in I suppose in the right place at the right time, Craig, to help out.
They at HMAS Sydney Association. Cole, you served on the Sydney, didn't you?
I did serve on Sydney number 4. I went to the Gulf in Operation Slipper in the early 2000s.
And just give us a sense of life on board the ship.
It's a very different to everyday work of life. You work many hours, like you're usually in the 2-watch system, either about 8 hours on, 8 hours off, and you're just on a rotation basis.
The Fleet Air Arm Association Queensland. This was formed in 1948 to serve on aircraft carriers Vengeance, Sydney and Melbourne. Naval planes ceased in the early 80s, 1982, when the Melbourne was decommissioned. She has seen action in Korea, the Malayan emergency in Vietnam. And one of the Navy's newest squadron in the Fleet Air Arm was the 822X Squadron, the Navy's unmanned aircraft systems squadron, flying both the Scan Eagle and S-100 Cam copter. And Cole, for you, I gather it was a sense of adventure that encouraged you to enlist in the Navy.
Oh, absolutely. Look, I grew up in a country town in New South Wales, just south of Tamworth, and I was in the recruiting van that was in the town. They come along. I was looking at a poster on the wall within the van there. I think it was of a sailor sitting in a rickshaw, I think in Singapore or Hong Kong or someplace in Southeast Asia anyway. And the sailor came up to me, the recruiter said to me, would you like to join the Navy? And I go, yes, I do. So, and I suppose the rest is history from there on in.
Can you relate to that, Peter Tedman?
Oh, absolutely. They came to the school. I was up at Maroochydore High, next to our WAG school, and hopped on the train. But I was still I'm still too young. So I had to wait until I made it to 15 and a half, the ripe old age, before I was able to join as a junior recruit, which was the same as Cole, as a junior recruit.
Yeah, back in the day, from the 1960s, I think, through to the early 1980s, we had where they do junior recruit intakes. This is where they took sailors who were young boys, really, from the age of 15 and a half to 16 and 3/4, I think it was the age. Allowed. They took us, who either did a 12-month training or a 9-month training, including with the Navy training, also included English, maths, physics as well, to finish off your normal higher education as well.
And Peter Tedman, because you were only a teenager at the time, leaving home on the Sunshine Coast and effectively going to the other side of the country.
It was, yeah, to Perth. Oh, it was a fantastic trip. We went by train. So every day, the first day we were in Sydney, then we were in Melbourne, Adelaide, and then we finally made it to West Australia. We lost a few people along the way, but they decided they didn't want to play, so they went home. But yes, it was an amazing time, amazing.
The Australian Naval Communications Branch Association coming to view now, led by Cole.
That's Alan Hellier. He's he's the president of the Brisbane branch of the RAAF Communications. But the significant for Alan is that he's a survivor of the Voyager incident back in 1964.
And for those unaware of the story of the Voyager, what happened?
Well, they were doing exercises off the east coast of Australia near Jarvis Bay, working with HMAS Melbourne, the aircraft carrier at the time. They were doing manoeuvres. Part of those manoeuvres was a lifeguard station for the ship to go into. There was a breakdown in communications and we had some fatal errors.
The Royal Australian Naval Clearance Diving Association. We're seeing the banner of right now, Peter Tedman. And, well, you're the president of the Clearance Divers Association, a highly specialised role.
Well, I have been up until today.
Today?
I formally hand over to the gentleman on screen now, Michael Wolfe, as the new national president. So I'm stepping away. But not stepping away.
You're still going to be involved.
Yeah,
there's no
absolutely.
escaping that.
And today we have a larger group because we have a reunion happening in Brisbane to coincide with Anzac Day. Amongst those you can see on the screen, you'll notice one who's wearing his uniform kind of centre stage now. That's Bob Platt. He started off as a young clearance diver and now he's a Rear Admiral about to discharge. And the great thing for Bob is this is the first time in his career that he's been able to march alongside his dad. Oh. And his dad was a Nasho from the 50s. So they're finally getting to march together. So what a proud day for those two.
What a moment for the family.
Incredibly good, yeah.
So glad you were able to share that with us. And we see Michael Wolfe, who's taking over the presidency.
Yep.
That beret that he's wearing, what does that signify?
Signifies that he completed SAS selection but didn't go on to do things like some of the courses that they needed to do to get the winged dagger. So he wears the beret with a Navy badge on it.
Whereas you have that winged dagger.
Oh, no. I have the wings.
The wings.
For qualification and serving with the regiment, as does Michael. But no, because we didn't go on to do the patrol course and a number of other army courses, it wasn't the complete script. So there's Michael.
We'll talk more about your association with the Special Forces a little bit later this morning. The specialised role that there is for clearance divers, Pete, and just take us through that level of training that's involved.
Well, they're called mine clearance divers for a good reason. They are the first to be in the water to clear the mines on the way for a landing. They then go ashore and clear the beach of any mines. And of course, in nowadays, mine clearance, they're in Afghanistan. It's a long way away from the ocean. So they continue, and I'm getting away from a few of my fellow clearance divers.
Well, make sure you wave back. Commander Peter Tedman in commentary with you here on ABC TV. My name's Craig Zonka, and Warrant Officer Cole Scott, as the Navy associations make their way past City Hall here in the heart of the Brisbane CBD. The Far East Strategic Reserve Association. You mentioned HMAS Voyager before, Cole Scott, along with HMAS Quiberon. These were the destroyers, frigates and minesweepers based in Singapore in the 50s to deter the spread of communism. Many of the close to 7,000 Navy Nashos served there.
Yes, Craig. Look, they spent a lot of their time in the Southeast Asia period of time during the 1940s, particularly 1942. Did great service for the Commonwealth and for Australia, and also the Southeast Asian area.
HMAS Quiberon was a Q-class destroyer built for the Royal Navy in 1942. As part of Operation Torch later that year, Quiberon was part of the British Naval Force assigned to support Allied landings in North Africa. And the Company of Master Mariners of Australia coming into view now. Founded in 1938 by Captain Bolton here in Brisbane and has since expanded to all states in Australia. They operated worldwide, transporting people, goods and materials. And can we say a thank you to you, Warrant Officer Cole Scott, for joining us again in commentary, Anzac Day 2024.
Pleasure, Craig. Good to be here. Look, I'm looking forward to the rest of the parade. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cole. As we see the last of the naval contingent and associations, it's the Royal Australian Army that take centre stage in the parade. And joining us in commentary, soldiers from 7th Brigade. In commentary, Major Scott Hill is with us. Scott, so good of you to join us this Anzac Day.
It's great to be here, Craig, representing Army on this magnificent day.
the mounted troop, where you see the emu plumes in their slouch hats.
Very representative light horse regiments. And we can see headquarters 7 Brigade approaching now, and being led by Lieutenant Colonel Rory Hale, who's the Chief of Staff of headquarters 7 Brigade. Our commander, Brigadier Giles Cornelius, is in the Solomon Islands with Joint Task Group of ADF personnel and other government agencies supporting the election.
Around the elections in the Solomon Islands, of course. Tell us a little bit about 7th Brigade, of course, based at Gallipoli Barracks.
7th Brigade has 7 direct combat units. And we'll see most of those today, but we won't see the 2nd 14th Light Horse Regiment, and we won't see the 8th 9th Battalion. But we'll go through the others as they come by. But the brigade is now the ADF's contingency land force unit. So they're at a high degree of readiness and a high degree of capability, ready to respond to any sort of contingencies, whether that be non-combat evacuations, in some cases domestic ops, or full spectrum combat operations.
And we're hearing the strains of the Royal Australian Artillery Band setting the beat for soldiers for 7th Brigade.
And in fact, they belong to one regiment. And you can see one regiment from the Royal Australian Artillery behind the band. And they're being led today by their commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Khalid El Khaligi. One regiment provide a significant firepower coordination for the brigade, and they are equipped with the M777 light howitzer, and they use GPS guided and also standard munitions. They are in the modern age of digital as well as standard. And right behind them we have the 2nd Combat Engineer Regiment, led by Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Edgar. They're very well known to the Queensland community through their domestic operation support, given the fact that they've got those engineering backgrounds.
Of course, and have been called to task, particularly in response to natural disasters, among
exactly
a number of other operations.
And today we should see the explosive detection dogs, but they'll be appearing shortly. And but we do have their mascot up the front behind their commanding officer. And that is a little
terrier you might have just seen walk out of shot there.
Exactly, yes. And they also have the explosive detection dogs walking up there as well. They're actually rescue dogs that have been obtained by the regiment to support. And the reason why they are walking to the front of the troops is that in operations, the dogs and their handlers do walk ahead of the combat troops. For example, the infantry, to make safe passage and detect any threats. Yeah. But look, these people create mobility and create delay. They build bridges, make roads, clear minefields. They're technically minded, and they do a fantastic job to support the infantry and the armoured elements.
This unit just coming into view now on our screens here on ABC TV.
Yes, this is the 7th Combat Support Battalion. This is the regiment, I should say. They provide communication support to the brigade. They're being led by Lieutenant Colonel Brenton Lawler. So they provide communication support, they provide information systems and electronic warfare support to our units and any attached units.
And as you're watching at home and you see the slouch hat of Australian troops, you can just notice the different colour badges that signify the different units as they march past.
That's correct. They're called colour patches, and they actually have their origins from World War I, and they've been modified over time, and some are actually original, like the 7th Brigade, for example. They've got a blue diamond felt patch on the side of their hat, and hence one of the nicknames for the brigade is the Blue Diamonds, which comes from that patch.
And I think this would have to be 6 RAAF.
No, it looks like there's been a bit of a change in order here. We've got the 7th Combat Service Support Battalion, led by their commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Amber Humphreys, and this organisation provides logistical support, supplies, including transport, to the brigade to ensure the brigade can maintain its readiness, its combat capability, rapidly deploy and be sustained. Pretty much without our logistics support, we we cannot commit our combat elements.
And, of course, you know, a lot of these units have origins tracing back to, well, for 7 Sisby, for instance, back to 1914 in Gallipoli.
Absolutely. So, although the unit was formed in 2012, for example, 5 Transport Squadron, which is the transport element of this organisation, was first raised and went to Gallipoli in 1914. And since then, the unit has supported, or members have supported, operations in South Vietnam, Timor-Leste, Iraq, Afghanistan and Pacific region, working with our various regional partners. In fact, if I could add there, each of our units, in fact, have a commitment to regional partners, and we work across the brigade with nations of Fiji, New Caledonia, Tonga, Vanuatu and New Zealand on exchanges, exercises, training activities, and so forth, sharing those common elements and cooperation which we can apply if we have to deploy with them or to provide support and assistance in the region.
And there was a large number of personnel from 7th Brigade also involved with exercise Talisman Sabre last year with US forces.
That's correct, yeah. And it's a regular appointment for our brigade to attend a Talisman Sabre exercise. It's a great test of our readiness, and the brigade has to prepare for quite some time in the lead up. This looks like the Army Band, also based at Gallipoli Barracks. So the next unit who's approaching is the 6th Battalion of the Royal Australian Regiment, a well-known Brisbane unit that's also led today by Lieutenant Colonel Ed Cousins, their commanding officer. The infantry is pretty much the basic building block of a combat brigade, supported by the engineers, armour and the other elements of the brigade. It's a demanding role and requires standards of mental and physical toughness, battlecraft and determination by all ranks who are expected to lead from the front. And this unit has got a rich history, being formed in the 1960s with the build-up of the Australian Army. But they've served operational service in South Vietnam, East Timor, Iraq and Afghanistan. And if you note just behind the 2nd Division, you'll see the 6 RAAF colour party coming through. And the colours, both the regimental and the King's colour, I should say, these days.
Yes, it is the King's colour, that's right.
Nearly. They actually, particularly the regimental colour, you'll note the streamers from that. That signifies battle honours. And then you'll see campaign patches on the regimental colour. And you'll note there is a streamer there for Long Tan, which is a battle that 6RA is well known for, and for which Delta Company was awarded Presidential Unit Citation.
Yes, from the United States for their work in Vietnam, a battle that has gone down in the history books. And more recently, I should point out, Corporal Dan Kieran was from 6RAR. He was awarded a Victoria Cross.
That's absolutely correct.
For his actions in Derapat and Afghanistan back in 2010. He was deployed as a number of members of 6RAR were at that particular time. The first and only award of the VC to a serving member of a battalion of the Royal Australian Regiment, and the first to a member of a line unit since World War II.
That's correct. The other VCs were awarded to members of the Australian Army Training Team in Vietnam.
We've seen
and the other two are obviously to Special Forces. Three, I should say, were Special Forces, both Commandos and SASR.
And as we see the serving contingent of Army come past, 7th Brigade, these are just a number of units, I think about 1,000 or so serving personnel, but you mentioned 8-9 RAR not marching today here in Brisbane.
So 8-9 Battalion, like a lot of the units, we do have people away at the moment supporting activities or operations, I should say, but 8-9, for example, is also providing some opportunities to commemorate Anzac Day elsewhere in South Queensland, and also we tend to rotate the units around, so the soldiers and their families can go and commemorate Anzac Day under their own arrangements, and rather than every year having to march on Anzac Day. So it gives them an opportunity to get together with their mates and their family and commemorate. And
we'll talk a little bit more about 8-9 RAR along with the 2nd 14th Light Horse Brigade when their associations make their way down Adelaide Street here in the heart of the Brisbane CBD. The Queensland Light Horse Heritage Band you see there, which was first formed back in 2005 after the closure of the Army Reserve Light Horse Band. They revived band, you might say, as one of 6 bands supported by the Queensland Services Heritage Band Association. dressed with a nod to the 2nd 14th Light Horse Brigade, as we just mentioned. You can see that with the emu plumes and the slouch hats being worn by members of this particular band who are setting the beat for the Army associations that are just coming into view, led by the 1st Armoured Regiment Association, 3rd Cavalry Regiment Vietnam and the 2nd 14th Light Horse Regiment Association. They're all marching together today. The 1st Armoured Regiment was formed in 1949 and served in Vietnam from 68 through to 71, operating Centurion tanks, which were regarded as being worth their weight in gold. The 3rd Cavalry Regiment Association served in South Vietnam from 65 through to 72 and was one of the first units to establish the task force at Nui Dat and the last to leave in 1972. And of course, the 2nd 14th, it can trace its lineage back to the 1860s and is the oldest Australian regular army unit these days, based at Enoggera.
At Gallipoli Barracks, correct.
The A Battery Association. This is one of the oldest continuing serving regular army units in the military. A Battery is the only Australian artillery unit to bear the King's and Queen's colours in banner form, as I understand.
That's correct. And they are the oldest continuous, even though 2nd 14th did pip them at the post from establishment perspective. A Battery has been a continuous unit in various regiments throughout Australia, and as you said, they're now part of one regiment, which is in Gallipoli Barracks here at Enoggera in Brisbane.
And I understand that the howitzer, what is it, the M777 howitzers that have been with one regiment.
Yes.
Some have been gifted to Ukraine.
Yes, I think from memory about 12, 18 months ago, some were gifted, and they are the howitzer of choice, you might say, for Western nations, and so, given the support that was provided by Australia and other nations, the perfect weapon system. But they've all been replaced.
With thousands lining the street today, waving their Australian flags, there's lots of applause for veterans of the 101st Field Battery Association, as you see in front of you right now on ABC TV. Raised during World War I, this association has also served in Malaya on 2 tours of duty in South Vietnam, the first 66 to 67 and the second in 69-70. In February of 67, during Operation Bribey in Vietnam, retired Major General Jim Ryan was mentioned in dispatches as he called in rounds within 50 metres of his position whilst supporting Bravo Company of 6 RAAF.
It was a particularly ferocious battle of Ap Mai An, and now well celebrated by 6 RAAF.
The 105th Field Battery Association, also part of one regiment?
Yes, they are. They're now a battery. Again, they were raised in 1960 in Egypt, in fact, for World War I. And then over the years, they've been raised and disbanded over time, reformed at one stage as a reserve organisation, shut down, and then they did deploy to Malaya in support of the Australian response to the Malayan emergency, and then later served in South Vietnam, including providing support to the Battle of Long Tan and in particular D Company. And sorry, go on.
I was going to say in more recent times too, you see Afghanistan mentioned on the association's banner.
Yeah, exactly right. And in fact, they've also served in Iraq as well, in the modern era, more contemporary era.
I'm just seeing the banner of the 2nd 10th Field Regiment Association. This was formed in July of 1940 here in Brisbane at Red Bank Camp. The unit was serving in Singapore in 1942 when the island fortress fell to the Japanese. For the next 3.5 years, the men had to endure the brutality of being prisoners of war, which, as you can imagine, subjected to horrendous conditions and hard labour. Of the 834 officers and men of the regiment who became prisoners, 270 died. The survivors were liberated in late August 1945 and began returning to Australia and are represented today by their families marching in their honour. The Locating, Surveillance and Target Acquisition Association, known as the eyes and ears of the battlefield, you might say, Scott.
Yes, and they've over time they've now by osmosis, they've now formed into what is known as 20 Regiment Royal Regiment of Australian Artillery, also now based at Enoggera at Gallipoli Barracks. Again, they're still involved in surveillance and target acquisition. And these days they've now moved into the operation of drones, or tactical aerial systems as we now commonly refer to them.
Tactical aerial systems.
Yes.
The thing that I always find with the military is you love an acronym, don't you, Major Scott Hill?
Well, I won't say I love them, but...
and the hardest bit is everyone you work with from overseas talks about the same thing. They use different acronyms.
Yeah.
It's mind-numbing.
We actually have a glossary of these terms because so often those acronyms are repeated and they have different meanings.
Don't worry, you should see my glossary. It runs to 100 pages today for Anzac Day 2024. You're on ABC TV.
But
yes, Scott?
I was going to say, 20 Regiment is typical of the evolving nature of modern warfare. Yes. Going from... it would have been some form of telescope in days gone by, through to quite simple radar systems. Then now we're into the world of drones and the immediate 24/7-hour battlefield and we have to respond to.
I've been talking to Commander Tedman about that catalyst for him to sign up many years ago. For you, Major Scott Hill, what led to your military service?
Well, I guess I was exposed to it from a young age. My father was in the military for a couple of decades as well, and so that was where my interest was piqued, and he had some quite interesting postings, and so there was a certain attraction to that. I had some other interests and initially got into banking, but to be quite frank, being stuck in an office and the alternative of joining the military was far too appealing. And so, I did sign up.
Well, a long way from banking to your role with the Australian Army over the years, as we look down on what has been a beautiful day here in Brisbane. Very different to Anzac Day 12 months ago, Peter Tedman.
Last year we were talking about how much water the bandsman was pouring out of his tuba or whatever.
We were, yes, as the bands went by. As another pipe and drum band set the beat for those of that looks to be the Sapper Association, incorporating the 1st Field Squadron Group Association and the 17th Construction Squadron Association. There's always that saying, isn't there, to follow the Sapper, Scott Hill?
There is. They do lead from the front, and for good reason, making a safe route for those organisations who are serving and clearing the routes for combat troops. And they have served in a great deal of operations, and in particular humanitarian and peacekeeping operations. Significant contribution post-conflict for mine clearance. And given the notorious nature of mines, their expertise is always called on. And a lot of like these gentlemen and ladies, ex-sappers are actually called into private organisations and UN organisations to take that expertise to those old battlefields to make it safe for those people.
Well, and we see follow the Sapper written there on the 1st Field Squadron Group.
Yes, and you can see there from the battle honours, the engineers had their origins in the Boer War and have pretty much served in every major campaign and conflict since that time.
These veterans marching of the 17th Construction Squadron Association, and I just noticed on their banner the little phrase, "a little bear to fix it," which is taken from an old Sally's Blue ad. The modern day unit moved to Nogra back in 2017.
Very useful organisation, and if memory serves me correctly, they were one of the first subunits to get an overseas deployment since Vietnam. From memory, they deployed in the mid-90s, I seem to recall, to Namibia.
The Water Transport Association. Peter, I know you've worked closely, you might say, with the water transporters over the years.
We did over the years, yes. The water transport guys and our divers, our trainee divers, would often work with water transport, so we could do clearance on the way in, and they could be there as well. So it was very complimentary, let's say, working together with those guys.
And Major Scott Hill, I want to ask about a memorial that was dedicated earlier this year, 50 years on from the 1974 floods, to a couple of members from the Water Transport Association.
Yeah, a bit of a personal association. My primary school teacher was actually related to one of the gentlemen who lost their lives. And so in 28th of January in the 74 Brisbane floods, light amphibious resupply vehicle, or LARC, was out assisting doing rescues and resupply. Regrettably, the vehicle struck high power lines, which everybody had been told had been turned off. And there were 2 fatalities, a number of injuries, but the local Mogul History Society on the 50th anniversary rededicated and rebuilt the memorial in their honour, brought the families, which is a great way to rededicate their memory and for the benefit of the families and indeed the history of water transport.
And of the 1974 floods, which of course have gone down in the history books for many in Brisbane and their devastating effect on the region. The Intelligence Corps Association, just coming through, served in all theatres of war, World War II, including small groups embedded with our allies, Korea, South Vietnam, Southeast Asia, the Pacific, Australia, all operational areas of the Middle East, especially in more recent times. And the banner there is of the Royal Australian Signals Association. For the last few years, the ranks have been growing, and we now see, what would that be? 50 to 60 members of the Corps marching behind the banner. Swift and sure, their motto.
It's based on the, you can see Mercury,
the winged messenger of the gods.
Messenger of the gods.
That's right. The Corps was formed in 1925. Members have served in all theatres of conflict.
And you can imagine that signals communication is absolutely critical to command and control for any military organisation since their inception, whether it be runners all the way through to modern IT systems.
Absolutely. You lose your comms and your logistics support, it's all over.
Yeah.
Time to go home.
Yes. Doesn't matter how good your frontline soldiers are.
It doesn't matter.
The gents of the Nudgee drum line from Nudgee School. And behind them we have the 7th Battalion of the Royal Australian Regiment Association, 7th RAAF, formed at Puckapunyal in Victoria in 1965 as part of the Australian Army's build-up prior to the Vietnam War, of course.
That's correct. And they then merged, I should say, at the conclusion of their tour of Vietnam. They did merge. They served twice in Vietnam, and but as the Australian Army was drawn down in 1972 and battalions and units were withdrawn from Vietnam, they merged with the 7th to become the 5th 7th. Again, they were de-linked in 2007 as the Australian Army grew, and the battalion deployed to Afghanistan in 2008 and 9 and again in 12-13. And they're now based in RAAF, Edinburgh.
And the banner for 8 RAR, the 8th Battalion of the Royal Australian Regiment Association, known as Brisbane's own, as you can see proudly on the banner.
And also the Grey 8. Again, the unit was established to go to Malaysia, again part of that growth in the 60s of the Australian Army, where they served with the 28th Independent Commonwealth Infantry Brigade, which did include New Zealand, and of course helps that Anzac tradition. And between October 69 and October 1970, the battalion did deploy to Vietnam as part of the 1st Australian Task Force. They're well known for battle of and earning a combat reputation in the Long Hai area, where they undertook a series of very successful patrols, ambushes, and captured a large bunker complex. And they were awarded the Cross of Gallantry and Palm Unit Citation.
We see the 9th Battalion Association, 9 RAR. Of course, the 8-9 has been merged.
Correct.
Based here in Brisbane at Gallipoli Barracks in Enoggera. 9 RAR was first raised in 1967 to serve in Vietnam. The former Governor-General, Sir Peter Cosgrove, commanded an infantry platoon of 9 RAR in Vietnam, and in doing so was awarded the Military Cross. The battalion returned to Australia in November of 69. It was reformed at Enoggera in January 1970. And the 2nd 4th Battalion of the Royal Australian Regiment, 2-4. Association was formed in 2013, but the battalion itself was formed post-Vietnam by amalgamating the 2nd and 4th Battalions, based out of Townsville, weren't they?
That's right. And the 2nd 4th is still based in, I should say the 2nd Battalion is still based in Townsville. In fact, this year is the 30th anniversary of the 1st Australian Peacekeeping personnel to arrive in Rwanda, of which 2 Battalion was a significant portion. Or 2-4, I should say, was a significant portion of that organisation.
And St Peter's Lutheran College Band leading the way for
8th, 9th
The
Battalion.
8th, 9th Battalion Association. So this is the Linked Battalion Association.
That's correct, and it looks like we might have a couple of the young current soldiers who are marching with the older veterans today. It's a really good turnout by 8th, 9th Battalion.
And as they approach the dais, is that Stan the Ram I see there, the
yes.
mascot for the unit?
Well, that is a surprise. I was not expecting that, but that is Stan the Ram. The mascot
you see,
has
just
been
in
the
shot
mascot.
there.
Just saw him then. So it's a great turnout by 8th, 9 RAAF and quite a lot of current serving members. 8th, 9 RAAF was actually disbanded between 1997 and 2007, re-raised and deployed to Timor-Leste, Afghanistan and Iraq. And being Brisbane zones, they have deployed on numerous domestic operations supporting Australians in need. They are a direct command unit of the 7th Brigade, and they're currently rolled as a motorised infantry battalion. And they utilise the ubiquitous Bushmaster or protected mobility vehicle for their operations.
Oh, the Bushmaster, of course. And these days we're seeing a few other vehicles enter the military service, including the Boxer, which is being constructed by Ryan Mattel at Ipswich.
That's right.
I think with the 2nd 14th.
They are with the 2nd 14th, yes, an armed reconnaissance vehicle. That's correct. And interestingly enough, 8th 9 RAAF has a very strong relationship with the Royal Fijian military forces. They do regular exchanges and training activities with them as well.
The 5th, 7th Battalion Royal Australian Regiment Association. The 5th and 7th battalions were linked after the conclusion of the Vietnam conflict.
That's correct. That occurred in 1973, again part of that drawdown. And they were employed as a mechanised infantry battalion in the day, and they actually maintain the mechanised doctrine and tactics that are seen and used today by other mechanised units of the Australian Army.
The former Queensland Governor, Peter Arneson, was once the commanding officer of the battalion.
That's correct, and I was told there is a gentleman there by the name of Major Bob Varco, who was in fact just behind the banner, and Major Bob Varco enlisted as a private rifleman in 1977. Spent many years at 5-7 RAAF, and he retired in March this year after serving 47 years in uniform.
We have the 1st Battalion of the Royal Australian Regiment Association, 1 RAAF, raised from the 65th Infantry Battalion at the end of World War II. 1 RAAF would be currently based at Laverack Barracks.
Correct, in Townsville, the big blue one, somewhat sentimental. This is a unit that my father did serve in whilst in Malaya. But this unit has been a standalone battalion since its inception. Has served in the Korean War, Malayan Emergency, Vietnam War, Somalia, East Timor, Iraq, Afghanistan. Numerous domestic operations. The
2nd Battalion of Royal Australian Regiment Association, 2 RAAF. We were talking about the 2nd, 4th before.
Yes.
The 2nd deployed twice to Vietnam with a company of New Zealand soldiers attached. The Townsville-based battalion has also served in more recent conflicts. And this year marks 25 years since its deployment to East Timor as part of the Interfet mission.
That's correct, and they were the first infantry unit on the ground in Timor. And again, since then they've served in Afghanistan, Solomon Islands, and assisted Fiji and North Queensland following natural disasters.
And it's involved with amphibious operations. So, Scott Hill,
yes.
To the layman, what does that mean?
So essentially they're part of the Australian Amphibious Task Group, which is based under Headquarters 1st Division, which is based in here in Brisbane. But essentially they are they're developing doctrine and developing training techniques for amphibious operations. There's a requirement under the Defence Strategic Review for Army to put a focus on what we call littoral warfare or littoral manoeuvre, which is that area of coast of ground and sea following our coastlines, which makes sense given our country and the nature of our coastline and also the region that we're operating in.
And so nice to see family members allowing veterans to march and be a part of the parade in wheelchairs too for some of our older veterans to keep those memories and stories alive now. The 4th Battalion of the Royal Australian Regiment, the 4 RAAF.
Yes, 4 RAAF has been raised and disbanded on numerous occasions. It was the last battalion to leave Vietnam, and it was then linked with 2nd Battalion in the early 70s. They were delinked, and 4AR was reformed between 1995 and 2009, and shortly after it was redesignated as a commando regiment, and then in 2009 it was renamed the 2nd Commando Regiment, and since then 4AR has been disbanded, but it's still waiting in the wings to be re-raised as required.
We're seeing the bright yellow banner of the 5th Battalion of the Royal Australian Regiment Association. You can't miss the tiger that takes centre place of this banner. Raised originally 5 RAAF back in 1965 with 2 tours of Vietnam. The battalion paid a heavy price. Approximately 10% of all Australians killed or wounded during the Vietnam War were from 5 RAAF.
And they're also well known for the Battle of Bin Ba, and that anniversary this year is, it's the commemorating the 55th anniversary of that battle. And it was an unusual combat experience in that it involved combined arms using armour and helicopters, and it was a close quarter or fierce close quarter combat as part of that operation.
5 RAR now based in Darwin. 6th Battalion of the Royal Australian Regiment Association, 6 RAR. A proud history. We mentioned some of the members of 6 RAR serving members who walked earlier with the contingent from 7th Brigade at Gallipoli Barracks here at Enoggera. Very well known for their efforts during the Vietnam War and the Battle of Long Tan.
And given that they've been based here for a significant portion since they were raised, there's quite a strong contingent and strong presence of ex-6RAF veterans in the South Queensland area.
And just to note towards the rear, to be able to march with your children as we're seeing here, and that veteran obviously with medals of his own, and then family members that he's paying tribute to today, although it might have been a little bit slow for a dad by the look of things.
Yeah. Might have to pass her off. But most of the associations these days are welcome family members, and you'd probably also note too that quite a few associations now rely on families to march in the stead of their relative.
The St Joseph's College band at Gregory Terrace, you know that red and black uniform, very well known around Brisbane, based up at Spring Hill. And then it's the Special Operations Command, incorporating the Australian Special Air Service Association and the Australian Commando Association. And you would describe these members as the elite of the elite. And I should say I'm privileged in commentary because I have 2 former SAS leaders, you Commander Peter Tedman and of course Major Scott Hill. You've a troop commander with the SAS. Commander Tedman, can you give us a bit more of an insight into the role of the SAS?
Craig, when I was the reason I was part of SAS was from the counter-terrorism side of things. They are, as is oft used, the tip of the spear. They're so good in the field, and but while I was there, and Scott was coincidentally there around the same time, I think in '86, around there, yeah, we did cross paths, and I was fortunate enough to go back in the '90s once I commissioned and spend a couple of more years there. So I was there. And
I'll just note the difference in colour of berets. We were talking about the sandy beret before of the SAS, and the commando beret, that's the green.
The green beret, that's correct, yeah.
And us military folk, we're very concerned about our greens, and this one's a Sherwood green.
A Sherwood green.
Oh, yeah.
I'll remember that.
And the Special Operations Command banner is quite significant because that's identifies the fact that all our Special Forces units that used to be reasonably independent came under one command.
Yes.
And so we now have engineering elements with the Special Operations Engineers. We've got signallers, we've got SAS, we've got a couple of commando.
Bit of maritime support along the way.
Exactly. So
great.
And you can see there some of the history with the commandos. As a commando association there, a very strong history of the independent companies, M&Z Special Force from World War II.
The Association of Australian Army Training Teams. So this incorporates the training team who served in Vietnam, also in Iraq. We mentioned at the very beginning of our broadcast today the work of Victoria Cross recipient Keith Payne, who served with the Australian Army team in Vietnam. Was the first Australian unit into Vietnam and the last out.
Correct, yes. They first arrived in Vietnam in 1962.
And I guess that story of Keith Payne, Peter Tedman, really resonated for you.
It did. Craig, I remember as a young kid, I think I was about 12-year-old, our teacher talking about Keith Payne being awarded a VC. I took the interest at the time because my brother had not long come back from Vietnam, so I sort of saw that. But many years later, as the CO of Morton, I was privileged to be one of the wreath layers at Currumbin on Remembrance Day, and I got to sit down with Keith and talk to him. And he never talked about what he'd done, but he talked about his passion for veterans and supporting those with PTSD, which he obviously suffered. And it was just inspirational. It was all about what he could do for someone else. So it was, he's an amazing man.
Well, again, that shows that passion for service.
Absolutely.
And to help improve the situation.
Still doing it.
He does, at the age of 90. And a shout out to Keith and his beautiful wife, Flo. And, just noting his involvement for veterans with PTSD, the mental health unit at Greenslopes Hospital, which, of course, has its own military history, is named in Keith Payne's honour. This is Anzac Day 2024, the march through the Brisbane CBD, the 49th Battalion Association. After being raised in 1916 in Egypt, 49th Battalion fought in all major battles in World War I, including Villers-Bretonneux, Amiens, Pozières, Passchendaele, and the breaching of the Hindenburg Line. And a contingent of 49th Battalion Association members will actually be in Papua New Guinea today to dedicate a plaque to honour the service and sacrifice of the battalion during World War II. The Salvation Army Band have been a part of the parade in Brisbane for many, many years now, and still serving those who serve. Believe in good. What a message to have on their banner.
I think just before the 49th too, the 9th Battalion also went through.
Yes.
And they've got a very strong history in South Queensland, and first unit to land at Gallipoli on the 25th of April as well.
So the association very active in preserving its history with a museum at Enoggera and the Milne Bay Memorial Library and Research Centre, which is at Chermside, for those interested in military history. The New Guinea Volunteer Rifles, Papua New Guinea Volunteer Rifles, were an Australian Army militia unit formed in Rabaul in 1939. Effectively, fit men between the ages of 18 and 50 were recruited. They provided expert local knowledge and supported other allied units. They were referred to as the keepers of the gate into mainland New Guinea until the arrival of regular Australian and allied units. They also earned the nickname the Gallant 500. And then the Papua New Guinea Volunteer Rifles was activated in March of 1951, mostly with Australians who had served in World War II. Their role was to maintain subunits capable of providing information and advice on topography, local customs, guides and interpreters, and assistance in the organisation and training of Indigenous and regular forces if required. And both units were formed, served and disbanded without ever setting foot on Australian soil.
I add that relationship does continue even up until independence. There was the Pacific Islands Regiment, and since then there's been a very strong defence cooperation program where we actually have Australians embedded with the PNGDF and providing training support to the PNGDF and indeed their constabulary as well, and that continues to this day.
Well, we've just seen the Prime Minister walk a couple of sections of the Kokoda track in recent days to Isarava and the memorial there. The Papuan Infantry Battalion, New Guinea Infantry Battalion and Pacific Island regiments. This year marks the 80th anniversary of the formation of the New Guinea Infantry Battalions, who along with the Papuan Infantry Battalions fought in many spheres in New Guinea, including the Kokoda campaign. These were not the fuzzy-wuzzy angels, but were the all but forgotten barefoot New Guinean soldiers who fought alongside the Australian troops to help throw the Japanese invaders out of New Guinea. And throughout the existence of these various fighting units, there were approximately 500 Australians and close to 4,000 Papua New Guineans. And indeed, the Papua New Guinea Army evolved from the combining of these battalions to form the Pacific Islands Regiment, whose banner you also see today. Former Governor-General Sir Michael Jeffrey served in the Pacific Island Regiment and is a past patron of the association. The 39th Battalion Association also has incredible history on the Kokoda track. It was a militia unit and the first to engage the Japanese, indeed, on the track. Outnumbered and outsupplied, they were instrumental in stopping the Japanese. Their efforts during this epic battle have become legendary. The last surviving member of the 39th, George Turner, passed away in late 2022. And his son, Ian, was leading the association in his honour. The 2nd 14th Infantry Battalion Association. I mentioned Isarava and the memorial there. This was raised in Victoria, this battalion, and first saw action in the Middle East from early 1941 until it returned to Australia about a year later. And then after retraining near Yandina here in Queensland, the battalion first engaged the Japanese on the 26th of August 1942.
That's absolutely correct. And in fact, the 2nd 14th followed the 39th, and they did that final turnaround of the Japanese on the Kokoda track.
And you went there with a large contingent, didn't you?
I did, yeah.
Of veterans?
I was actually posted there in 97 and 98 and had the privilege of, when the 2nd 14th decided to have their last parade, as the gentlemen were all ageing, they came up to Port Moresby. There was quite a number of them. I think we had about 80-odd veterans there, and they were a magnificent bunch of men, some wonderful stories, but they actually flew quite a portion of them up to the Isarava site. It had only just been recently cleared. I'd actually walked through there about a month beforehand, and just been trees chopped down, all munitions and weapons found and stacked up, and the local Papua New Guinea tribe had built a grandstand in preparation for their visit, and that now is the site of the well-known Isarava Memorial, and it's a memorial to the Kokoda campaign, well-known, and it's got a number of plinths there. It's where the Prime Minister is actually this morning for the dawn service.
Yes. And
those plinths are emblazoned with the words courage, endurance, mateship and sacrifice, and that represents the values and qualities of the Australian soldiers who fought on the Kokoda track.
Oh, and more broadly, you know, from the days of the Gallipoli campaign.
Yeah.
And so have you walked the Kokoda track yourself, Scott Hill?
I did. When we were up there was 4 of us and a dad, in fact, one of the fellas' dads, who was actually in his early 60s. We walked it unsupported. Dad did end up getting a porter, but we took our time. We took about 9 days. It was a little damp at times, but it was one of the most rewarding experiences, and we did a little bit of history on the way. We had little projects to research, and we stopped at various battlefields and just ran through a quick assessment of the battlefield and the outcomes of those battles and the geography. One of the best activities I've had the fortune of undertaking.
And to try to get an understanding of the horrendous conditions that our soldiers faced during the Second World War.
We had pretty good kit, and when we walked through,
and they had GP boots,
and the soles falling off their boots.
And the only enemy we faced were mosquitoes. There was no one trying to shoot us.
A lot of those.
The Cameron Highlanders, the 61st Battalion Association, and you might have noticed the St Andrew's Pipe Band also wearing the same tartan. Now, the Cameron Highlanders first formed in 1938 as a militia unit, and then in 1942 fought in the famous Battle of Milne Bay in Papua New Guinea.
Could I add there that campaign in Milne Bay was 7th Brigade was actually present at that, and the 61st Battalion was actually one of the brigade's battalions, so that's part of our current 7th Brigade's history.
We have the 31st Battalion, 2nd 31st Battalion, 31st 51st Battalion Association, and well, currently this includes members of all those battalions, and the 31st Battalion has since merged with the 42nd Battalion and is a reserve infantry battalion currently headquartered out of Laverack Barracks in Townsville. And the 51st, who we heard mentioned and Saul mentioned in the banners, is known as the Far North Queensland Regiment.
Correct, and they're part of the Regional Force Surveillance Group.
We're just hearing the strains of the Brisbane Grammar School Band come past our commentary position, followed by the 161st Independent Reconnaissance Flight Association. The flight was formed at RAAF Base Amberley in September of '65 and then arrived in South Vietnam with the first Australian elements to become an integral part of the 1 RAAF group. Served in Vietnam from '65 to '72 in all areas. Its role was critical as it was varied, including direct operational support for the battalion and task force area, reconnaissance, battle control, target location, search and mark enemy activity, convey cover and medical evacuation. Here we have the Australian Army Aviation Association, or 4AAS.
Which did throw me, but that's obviously the acronym for 4A's, literally AAAA.
Exactly.
That threw me initially. It took me ages to work it out.
That's where you get 4A. Where you see 4A's written out and you go, hang on a second.
Yeah. So anyway.
But that's what you get, Combined Australian Army Aviation Association. We spoke about the love of acronyms earlier, Scott.
Yes. I know, we're our own worst enemy at times.
And of course, Army aircraft have been involved in all major battles in the Vietnam War. Army Chinooks played a key role in the opening battles of the Second Gulf War. Army helicopters also involved in Afghanistan. The 16th Aviation Brigade was raised 20 years ago with units across the country, including the training centre, which is based at Oakey on the Darling Downs.
That's right. They've actually had a bit of a change where that training centre is now under Headquarters 16 Brigade Command. And late last year, the brigade did move to Townsville, relocated, where there's significant assets located there for their particular aircraft.
And is there still a Vietnam-era Iroquois helicopter at the main entrance to Enoggera?
Yes, that was done up and brought in by some workshops and volunteers, and who knows what the future of that may be, given that the Headquarters 16 Brigade has relocated. We'll wait and see.
We're seeing the Army Transport Associations make their way past City Hall.
Again, critical requirement for the, providing resupply and logistics to our combat ground forces.
Well, we see the 85th Transport, known as the Road Runners. The nickname has persisted right up until today from their involvement in the Vietnam War. Initially operated under the nickname Wheels Across Vietnam, but Road Runners seem to stick.
Yes.
Today, the 85th Transport Troop is part of the 26th Squadron of the Royal Australian Army Corps of Transport. And there you see the 86th Transport Squadron. Again, you can't get there without a decent transport squadron.
No, that's right. And I think they belong to, well, I'd have to do a bit more research on these guys. I think they belong to one of the Force Support Battalions these days, judging by the banner. And
you can see he served in Vietnam and also East Timor. And we'll reflect on the Interfet peacekeeping mission a little later when the peacekeepers marched through, and of course talk of your involvement in that, Commander Peter Tedman. And the Royal Australian Army Medical and Health Service Corps Association. This association, formed in 1984, first raised in 1903, has served in all theatres of war.
The Medical Corps is a pretty good example of the various types of service that people offer, given the nature of the skills of the medical fraternity. A lot of medical staff, doctors, nurses and so forth, when they serve their time in the military, they'll obviously go into private practice and so forth, but a significant proportion remain in the reserve, and they come back and provide service both operationally and also just in normal reserve service in their home units.
Well, expertise that is needed.
Yeah, and it's a bit of an exchange of, so they bring in their civilian experience from health and hospitals within the civilian community, and likewise they gain that experience, medical and health experience, when they are overseas, and can then bring that back.
The First Field Hospital Association here, established more than 50 years ago. The unit was originally responsible for treating battle casualties and men suffering tropical disease. 40 nursing officers served with the unit, which was the only unit to have female staff since its inception, would you believe? And how times have changed. They might be led by a donkey up front, but these days it might be a little more comfortable.
Well, the donkey is symbolic of the Medical Corps. You might recall Simpson and his donkey from days of Gallipoli.
Yes.
And so the Medical Corps has adopted donkey as its mascot. Whether it's permanently kept or borrowed for these sorts of events, who knows?
And the 11th Field Ambulance Association, you might remember when it comes to the 11th Field Ambulance Association, the name Weary Dunlop.
Yes.
And his incredible work on the Burmese Railway.
And also remembered at the base there's a road named after him which runs parallel to our health centre in that place. And in fact the The 11th Close Health Company is, I guess, the ambulance, or the 11th Field Ambulance is a forebear of that current unit, which is based at Gallipoli Barracks with the 2nd Health Battalion.
And, well, you need to keep your teeth in check, obviously, no matter what you might do, and that goes for defence personnel. And here you see the Royal Australian Army Dental Corps Association. The unit has served in many theatres of war to provide that emergency dental care. Deployments go back to World War I and II, through the Middle East, PNG, Korea, Malaya, Singapore, Rwanda, Vietnam, Solomons, Somalia and Afghanistan.
Well, as you said, an army certainly marches on its stomach, but they certainly need to have their health to continue the fight. And a toothache would be rather distracting.
Wouldn't it ever? Well, I think the catering corps will be marching down Adelaide Street soon on that point. The Royal Australian Army Ordnance Corps Association. This one was formed in 1985 with retired personnel interested in fostering and continuing corps spirit after having served in every theatre of operations Australia has been involved with since the Boer War. Its main role is to provide supplies and support to all units of the Army, everything from food to clothing, weapons, vehicles, medical supplies and engineering equipment. The Corps traces its history back to Federation and earned the prefix of Royal during the Second World War. The motto translates from Latin as "to the warrior his arms, to the thunder his thunderbolts." And here we have the Royal Australian Electrical and Mechanical Engineers, otherwise known as RAAF. The association comprising both of serving and retired members. The Corps originated in December 1942, and following World War II, King George VI bestowed royal assent and recognition of their outstanding achievements to repair and maintain military hardware in the most trying of conditions.
However, they do make the most of those austere conditions. They are very innovative gentlemen and ladies in this corps.
Well, pretty much everything from vehicle mechanics, electronics technicians, aircraft technicians, armament fitters.
Absolutely everything. They're brilliant at their job, and they can make anything work and get it back on the road for you.
And that tricolour flag of blue, yellow and red is flown wherever maintenance is being conducted.
They're always easily spotted, and no one really knows the origins of those colours. There's all sorts of debate about that, whether it's about technical mastery, their functional origins and so forth, but it's a mystery that they're still trying to unravel.
We spoke about the need for good teeth. Here's the good food. The Australian Army Catering Corps Association, and I love that motto, we sustain.
Yes.
Has served in all conflicts from 1943 to present date. The association was formed in July of 1991 for cooks, chefs, stewards and mess staff. And it's so true. You are what you eat, and you're only as good as what's in your stomach.
And the employment of the Corps has changed a lot over the years, but certainly, as you said, sustaining. And the Army Catering Corps is very much focused on catering in the field and in operations.
And here's a unit, the Commander Peter Tedman, you've had lots of involvement with, the Military Police Association.
Not a lot, thankfully.
How I joke. Tongue firmly in cheek, let me say. The organisation first established in 1916, the Australian Army Military Police. The Corps emblem you will see there, and the centre of their banner, the crossed Roman swords of justice. The Corps is now referred to as the Royal Australian Corps of Military Police and forms an important part of Army formations. In 2020, an amalgamation of Navy, Army and Air Force took place, creating a tri-service policing function for domestic requirements. While for combat operations, each becomes responsible for their own formation. They've served at home and overseas in both World Wars and in all major conflicts since. The Officer Training Unit, Skyville Association. This is before the days of all training being conducted at RMC in Canberra, Scott?
That's correct. Again, this unit was raised in 1965 at Skyville in New South Wales. It was to train specifically national servicemen as infantry platoon commanders because of the increase in the number of infantry battalions, the increase of the army requirements in the 60s. So graduates served in Vietnam, Singapore, Malaysia, Borneo and PNG. And many of these graduates, initially as national servicemen, many of them did continue into senior ranks to one-star level. And some very notable graduates being the Deputy Prime Minister Tim Fischer and a former Premier of Victoria, Jeff Kennett. And many of them went on to have exceptionally successful careers in the commercial world.
We're live on ABC TV for Anzac Day 2024. This is the Brisbane March. And the National Servicemen's Memorial Pipe Band leading the Nashos Association. You spoke about the fact that a lot of those Nashos then went on to officer training as well with distinguished careers. And the first National Service Scheme began in 1951 with all men aged between 18, over 18 called up for training in the Navy, Army and Air Force. A total of 227,000 served in 52 intakes. And then another 63,000 men were drafted in the second scheme that ran from 1965 through until 1972.
That's how my father ended up joining the Army. Part of his commitment in the early 50s was to do his national service. Got tapped on the shoulder and was suggested would he like to continue to serve in the regular Army. And in those days there was another officer training institution called Officer Cadet School in Portsea. So he trotted himself off there in 1954 and then was later posted and served a further 23 years in the military himself.
And a history that then you went on to follow, Scott?
Yes. And that's where it is.
But it does show that level of service that runs in families, something you've spoken about earlier, Peter, and you, Scott, that want to give back to society as a whole. And I think that's something we can all be proud of as Australians, that military history that is on display today and that we pay tribute to. It might have started Anzac Day from those landings at Gallipoli 109 years ago, but with the crowds of people you see flying Australian flags, it is something that we are all proud of as Australians. The pipe band for the National Servicemen was established in 1999 as a memorial to the young men who were called into duty. Let's have a listen. And with the National Servicemen's Association, it itself was founded in 1999 in Toowoomba, where, I don't know if you've had a chance to see it, but it is a rather stunning memorial to commemorate the 212 National Servicemen who were killed on active service and those who have died since. The Australian Peacekeepers and Peacemakers Veterans Association here now in Australia has been involved in peacekeeping since 1947 when 4 Australians were deployed to the first UN peacekeeping mission to Indonesia. Since then, Australian service personnel, together with Australian Federal Police, have served in more than 60 peacemaking and peacekeeping operations, as they're referred to as, around the world. Interfet, which began in 1999, was the largest deployment of Australian troops since the Second World War and since September 11th, 2001. Thousands of ADF personnel have been deployed in international campaigns against terrorism operating in the Middle East, Afghanistan and Southwest Asia.
We also mentioned this, the 25th anniversary of the, 30th anniversary of the first deployment of the Australian service contingent to Rwanda.
Yes.
And I know there's 3 particular individuals who deployed on that who are marching today. Lieutenant Colonel Albie Hughes, who was captain in those days, an engineer, a pharmacist, Captain Drew Miller, and a dentist, as we said, Lieutenant David Roberts. And they haven't caught up with each other for many, many years.
And as we talk about 25 years since Interfet Commander Peter Tedman, would you like to just talk a little bit about your involvement, because you were in there quite early with as a clearance diver?
I think it was because we were going over to clear the beaches and clear the harbours as a clearance diving group, but because of my link to the SAS were going in first to secure the port, and during one of the meetings I made a comment that they needed to be really vigilant about explosives that may be there and potential booby traps. So they decided that I was going with them. So myself and one of the ABs hopped on the first helicopter to go in, and our role was to look for IEDs or booby traps. So we spent a few hours making sure that it was all pretty safe, and then we brought the rest of the divers in from sea. So,
a few hours of quite tense actions, I would have thought.
Crawling around, looking in windows, breaking bits of wall off to look in so we didn't have to go in through the door. So, yeah.
We're seeing veterans of Allied forces march down Adelaide Street as part of the Anzac Day Parade in Brisbane. And I know the Royal Marines you spent some time with as well, Peter Tedman, with some SBS units soon after they'd been to the Falklands.
Most of them, they'd only just come back from the Falklands. We went over there because they were well advanced in ship underway recovery, which was something we were doing at the regiment. So we went over to learn from them, and they were exceptional. So it's been about 6 weeks there.
The British Ex-Services Association, you see the Union Jack. Members of the group are from all three services of the UK Armed Forces, along with members from the Royal Marines, Queen Alexandra's Royal Army Nursing Corps, who served in British military hospitals throughout the world, as well as many who fought in the Falklands War in 1982. Most of the members marching today have seen action within the last 30 years, all share that same feeling of brotherhood, mateship and pride that is synonymous with the veterans of both World Wars. And we spoke about Keith Payne being Australia's oldest living Victoria Cross recipient. There are only 8 in the world, and the oldest is Britain's World War II veteran, John Cruikshank, who is 103 years old. He is the only surviving VC recipient from World War II. He was seriously wounded, hit 72 times in fact, while sinking a German U-boat. Despite this and a badly wounded crew, Captain Cruikshank brought the Catalina flying boat he was involved with safely back to base, which is a 5.5-hour flight. These are the incredible stories that we need to make sure we remember and that form a huge part of Anzac Day, not just now in 2024, but in the many, many years to come. Commander Peter Tedman, Major Scott Hill with us on ABC TV. And as we look through the Allied forces, it is important to recognise, not just Australian and New Zealand troops, but the fact that we have these ties to so many others around the world, Scott.
Absolutely, and we have these relationships, as I've mentioned previously, that certainly the units of 7 Brigade have very specific relationships with various nations from the Pacific, as does the other brigades, for example, 3 Brigade in Townsville and also 1 Brigade in Darwin. They all have relationships in those regions.
We're just seeing the French Association here, the veterans from France. And a fact, it's important to remember, 80,000 French troops fought at Gallipoli alongside Anzac forces, 26,000 of whom were never to return home. It's quite phenomenal when you think about those sheer numbers of lives that were lost. Of course, there'd hardly be a family in Australia that wasn't touched by that conflict, and that goes for so many other nations around the world. And then, of course, close to 300,000 Australian troops joined French and Allied forces on the Western Front during the First World War. French forces have also served in World War II, the Korean War, and in Afghanistan.
Very significant component of French veterans from New Caledonia also attend services.
I just mentioned New Caledonia. In fact, one of our relationships is with the French Armed Forces in New Caledonia, and we regularly exercise and train with them, commonly referred to as the FANC, F-A-N-C, the French Armed Forces in New Caledonia.
We also have a contingent of Indian veterans who are marching to honour those who fought during the Gallipoli campaign, and again to ensure their sacrifices are not forgotten. Participating as part of the British Indian Army, 15,000 professional soldiers fought alongside the Anzacs.
But you can see a few of the older veterans, it appears, riding in the ubiquitous Willys Jeeps. I can't recall how many hundreds of thousands of those Jeeps that were produced. I know there was 2 companies that produced them. Willys, I can't recall the other, but hundreds of thousands of them around the world.
And it's so good to see that some are still in operational capability right now.
Still going strong.
Yeah, with much love by those who have kept their story alive.
In fact, the Queensland Military History Society, based at Fort Lytton, regularly rolls their Willys Jeep out.
The Rhodesian Veterans Association is also part of today's parade, formed in 1979. Rhodesian, or now Zimbabwe, troops served in the Boer War, World War I and II, Suez Crisis, and against Robert Mugabe's guerrillas. Also represents police, national park staff, Rhodesian Light Army, the Selous Scouts and SAS veterans. Rhodesia, then a colony of the United Kingdom, entered World War II along with Britain shortly after the invasion of Poland in 1939. By war's end, just over 26,000 Rhodesians had served in the armed forces, 8,390 of them overseas.
They had a very formidable reputation in the 70s during the Rhodesian wars, and the Selous Scouts and the SAS from those regions, formidable. Also, they had a parachute battalion as well. Again, they undertook some very extreme operations and a very interesting history that these individuals would have participated in.
The Queensland Irish Association Pipe Band is coming into view now, one of the oldest pipe bands in Queensland and the oldest Irish pipe band in Australia. Despite existing in many forms during the late 1800s and early 1900s, the pipe band can officially be traced back to 1925 with some references in newspapers of the time. The South African Military Veterans Organisation of Australasia, marching in honour of extensive service in both World Wars. Over 230,000 volunteered for service in World War I. The Union Defence Force invaded German Southwest Africa in 1914 and gained control of the German-held colony, which is now Namibia. But it was the Battle of the Somme that proved to be the most costly battle of the war for the Union Defence Force. And then in World War II, almost 350,000 volunteered for full-time service from South Africa. Let's take a listen to the Queensland Irish Association Pipe Band. Polish Ex-Servicemen's Association is a worldwide body established in 1945 with its headquarters in London and branches in 20 countries on 5 continents. The Australian Association was raised in 1947 and Polish personnel made up the 4th largest Allied force of World War II.
A lot of Polish were displaced during World War II and were headed to England, where they operated from in not only Polish units but also some English units as well.
The Hellenic Ex-Servicemen Association. These are members of the Hellenic sub-branch of the RSL, ex-servicemen of Greek or Cypriot origin who have served in the Australian, Greek or Cypriot armed forces. Anzac forces aided the defence of Greece and Crete in 1941. And Australians of Greek heritage have served in the Australian military forces for more than 100 years, with 5 in the Boer War, 80 in World War I, 2,500 in World War II, and 120 in the Vietnam War. Their flags and banners are carried by individuals in their traditional dress. And those uniforms, that was for a unit that was formed in 1868 in Greece as Royal Guards and remain today only for ceremonial purposes, guarding the tomb of the unknown soldier and the presidential palace in Athens. The Republic of Vietnam Veterans Association served with Australians in South Vietnam from 1962 through to 72. After the fall of Saigon in 1975, many sailed to Australia as refugees to start a new life. And members and family members are marching here today. And since that time, we've seen a huge influence of the Vietnamese, a large community here in Brisbane and southeast Queensland. And you reflect on that time that has passed since the Vietnam War, how veterans of that conflict were treated when they returned home, and how that story has changed and developed in the years since Scott Hill.
In fact, you're absolutely correct. It's the reverse is true. We've seen a lot of Australian veterans of the Vietnam War return to Vietnam to not only tour the former battlefields, they've met up with their former adversaries in very amicable circumstances, shared stories. And there's also quite a number of Australian Vietnam veterans who now live in Vietnam that have made it their home. And they've been made welcome. And there's some great stories that are coming out of those experiences.
It's one thing you find with servicemen worldwide, isn't it? They love to tell a story. And if they've got some common ground and they can talk about some, even opposition. Yeah. You know, look back at World War I where they had a game of cricket or whatever else on the battlefield.
Yeah.
But so we're there for a reason, but once that's done, we're back to being soldiers, sailors and airmen.
Yes. You talk of that cricket match known as the Shell Green match. Yes. And it's replicated in some form, you might say, today between an Australian Army 11 and Lord Mayor's 11, yes. Which happens at Brookfield at the showgrounds there today. And I love that story is being kept alive in that fashion, Major Scott Hill. And I don't know, do you know if the Army team or the Lord Mayor's team has the title from last year?
I seem to recall it was the Lord Mayor's team. I seem to recall the trophy was residing on our commander's desk.
Oh, there you go. But, you know, started about a decade or so ago, and it was originally a cricket match to use as a diversionary tactic for withdrawal purposes. So
at Gallipoli, yes.
At Gallipoli.
Yeah.
And to think that that memory lives on today is quite incredible, and to see it, there'll be a large number of people who will be gathering today at Brookfield for that, along with the Sri Lankan community who, you know, similar to, you know, World War I, will be supplying, of course there was links with the Sri Lankan service personnel during World War I, but the Sri Lankan community here in Brisbane will be supplying curries, as I understand it, to feed the hungry masses at the Shell Green cricket match, which will be happening today, organised by the Kenmore sub-branch of the RSL.
Maybe we should commentate there next year.
I'm not so great at cricket commentary.
I was thinking more the curry commentary, but nonetheless.
TOC H, Northern region. The origins of TOC H can be traced back to the battlefields of Belgium during World War I. And it was on these fields that tens of thousands of young men, as we spoke about, have lost their lives. And early in the war, it became evident that something had to be done for those returning from the front lines. It was then that Queensland-born chaplain Tubby Clayton in December 1915 in France set up a rest centre named Talbot House in honour of one of his closest friends. These days, TOC H members are dedicated to helping disadvantaged children, people with a disability, and running services for the elderly. The Salvation Army Band coming back down Adelaide Street. Formed in 2009 from the Carina, Coorparoo, West End and Mount Gravatt Salvos bands that date back to 1914. And they look like some highly polished euphoniums that just went past, and some cornets there. As someone who has played in a few marching bands over the years, it can be a bit of a challenge at times. but nothing compared to the sacrifices made by those who have served in the name of the Army, Air Force or Navy.
Speaking of the Salvation Army Band, the ADF has a strong relationship with the Salvation Army. For example, we actually have a small detachment of Salvation Army and indeed Red Shield members who work at the base, and they'll actually provide refreshments and so forth for soldiers when they're in the field on exercise or out at a range or some sort of activity, sporting activities and so forth, and still heavily involved.
They are leading the Salvation Army Band, leading descendants of veterans of all conflicts, with families of deceased veterans. And you'll notice as they come down Adelaide Street, they'll be wearing medals above their right breast, showing that they are not the medal's recipient, but marching in honour of those who were awarded those medals. Descendants of the Ratsit Association. One of the most famous campaigns. And the siege at Tobruk in 1941. The 2nd 25th Australian Infantry Battalion Association. What we have, we hold.
Being the two signifies 2nd AEST, which is World War II, as you can see from their battle honours.
And on what has been a sunny day in Brisbane, to see so many people lining the streets. So you look here in the CBD with the thousands that have gathered and the many that are flying Australian flags, young and old alike. People are 5, 6, 7, even up to 10 people deep along the roadway. And you'll notice most of them with phones in their hands taking photos. And filming family members. Of course, you can watch back today's Anzac Day Parade on ABC iView and through the ABC's YouTube channel. The Mackay North State High School Band on their 2nd trip through as part of this year's parade, marking their 30th year that they've been involved, coming down from Mackay. About 100 members of the band have made the trip this year. It's a highlight on the band's calendar to be a part of Anzac Day commemorations. And it's a real treat to have them back in Brisbane once more. You'll hear the drummers doing most of the work at the moment.
I know the Army units love having a band. There's not enough military bands, so to have a band of this calibre from a civilian organisation certainly helps those military units who are marching today.
And to make that trip down from Mackay each year,
it
shows what it means to the school to be involved.
Yeah. Mackay's got a very strong commitment to their community. It's a very unique community, and they also have a very strong commitment to the ADF with their cadet program. They've also got a very strong Army Reserve program. In fact, one that Keith Payne was posted, I think his final posting in the Army was in fact to Mackay as a training warrant officer in the 70s.
Of course, and still home to Keith and Flo today.
Exactly.
I was coming down early this morning and I saw them forming up, and I said to one of their teachers, well, I assume it was a teacher, how do you get so many teenage kids to do exactly what you want them to do and do it multiple times? And she just laughed.
The youth organisations that are a part of it, featuring the Girls Brigade, The Girls Brigade. There are currently over 30 Girls Brigade companies in Queensland, from as far north as Mount Isa, east to the Fraser Coast, west to the Darling Downs and south to the Gold Coast. Celebrating their 73rd, I think it is, anniversary in Queensland. Scouts, Queensland, formed in 1908 after the Boer War, when 4 young men established the first Scout patrols. Any Scout history for you, Scott, or you, Peter Tedman?
Yep.
Oh,
A cub and a Scout, yeah, I thought that was natural, and then you go into the military.
Was it a prerequisite for you as well, Scott Hill?
Very, very short time. However, there is an old colleague of ours, a former SAS officer, who has been involved in scouting all his life, and he's normally here providing guidance to these young scouts, bringing his love of adventure, love of the outdoors and experience to them.
A similar story for Girl Guides Queensland, proud to continue their service tradition as they salute our heroes this Anzac Day. No matter where the Girl Guides take the time to remember those who have bravely fought to make our world a better place and fight for the freedoms we know of today.
In fact, I was reminded this morning by one of our public affairs team that some of the dogs, or the explosive detection dogs and their handlers, were on the south side at a guides group helping them in the achievement of an Anzac badge qualification. So, yeah.
The Boys Brigade, also represented here today, began in Scotland in the 1800s with a strong history.
Honouring those that have gone before them, and the young leaders that have graduated through their leadership ability.
And these boys and men, the hopefully leaders of tomorrow. And let's hope they continue that tradition of service.
We appreciate the fact that you have stayed so long today for the march, and acknowledge and appreciate and respect those.
Of course, today's march wouldn't be possible without the contingent of parade marshals and the Anzac Day Parade Committee. The parade marshals are led by Andrew Jennings. A true credit to the entire organising committee that we can be here today under blue skies, paying tribute to those who have served and those who continue to do so. And the chair of that committee, Kerry Gallagher, standing next to the Governor, as you can see there. Followed by the Jeep and buggy operators who have helped allow veterans of all ages take part in today's Anzac Day Parade.
They definitely provide a significant service. So many veterans do want to participate, but given mobility issues, this makes a world of difference for them to participate in their marches and catch up with colleagues.
And as you peer up Adelaide Street, from the Willies that you spoke about,
yes,
a whole number of different vehicles that have been involved.
I can spy a Series 1 Land Rover there, short wheelbase Land Rover coming through as well. Again, used by the Australian Army many years ago, many decades ago.
Very much a collector's item in 2024.
I suspect so.
I know a few people who wouldn't mind having one of those in their garages, to be honest with you.
I'd have to put my hand up. The ubiquitous US truck, I can't recall the name. I think it may be another Willys or General Motors. But yeah, very common, produced great numbers, and many in the Southwest Pacific, and many were used post-World War II.
Of course.
By farmers in the local community.
And immortalised in quite a few military films since that time too.
Yes.
Heroes, I think, are the Cooper Scoopers that follow the mounted units today. They're getting an extra special.
And as we reflect on what this day means to both you, Major Scott Hill, and you, Commander Peter Tedman, I think, you know, it's also been a day where you think about family members, think about those who have fallen, you think about those qualities of courage and mateship, the sacrifices that have been made by those who serve, the thousands who continue to do so, whether it be with the Army, Navy or Air Force. And Peter, I know you referred back to your involvement with Interfet 25 years ago, for which you were awarded the Distinguished Services Medal, and the pride with which you would have when you consider that, and that time that you had within the Australian Navy?
Just think about family and friends, and you just see the pride on all the faces of the people going by, whether it's the kids or the dads or the granddads or whatever, or grandmothers. It really is. It just such a light-hearted, enjoyable day, if you know what I mean. You know, it's just a great feeling, I think. Yeah.
And light-hearted isn't a word that is used often when it comes to the military, is it?
No, but it is, because people are just enjoying themselves. They're walking along, they've got big grins on their faces, they're talking to their mate who's alongside them. You know, what better way to spend a day? And then afterwards, you know. And,
well, you mentioned for the Clearance Divers Association, it can be the one chance a year to actually catch up with old friends and colleagues.
Because this is a reunion, we got together last night, and some of those guys were trying to work out, it's like 30 years since I've seen them, because they were on course together, but they left the Navy and went to somewhere, you know. And so just seeing people, but the conversation is the same as it would have been all those years ago. So it's so easy.
And we have seen a number of serving personnel march as part of this year's Anzac Day parade. I just wanted to play you some of the shout-outs from troops who are representing the country on deployments around the world right now. We'll come back to that package in a moment here on ABC TV. Speak of awards, the DSM for you, Peter Tedman. There's one that I saw in your history, Major Scott Hill. I hope you don't mind me mentioning. Not necessarily, well, I think you were in uniform at the time, but an award for bravery. Going back a couple of years now, 2015, would that be right?
You've done your research.
That's part of the job that comes with hosting Anzac Day.
No, it was actually working with QPS at the time. There was a QPS individual, another soldier with me. We were actually doing some preparation work just outside the barracks for Anzac Day, prior to Anzac Day, and we just noticed what appeared to be a fire that was getting out of control. And as we got closer, there was a house on fire, and so we found out that there was a resident inside, and we endeavoured to make entry. It took some time. Regrettably, the individual had locked himself in this building. We eventually got ourselves in there, but by that stage the fireys had turned up and ordered us out. They had it under control.
But you were there quick off the mark.
Yeah, and I think it was just something, and interestingly enough, the policeman who was also an ex-military member as well, and all three of us, without any doubt, just looked at each other. Time to go.
It's ingrained into you.
Yeah, and I think we can't be bystanders. I think most military people I know cannot be a bystander. If they see an issue, see a problem, they actually want to lean in and deal with it in a good way. It doesn't have to be the violence of a military campaign, but we actually want to deal with things and make things right.
And Commander Peter Tedman, you spoke of your experience with the SAS, and I'm interested in, from the Navy then joining an army unit, that transition for you. What was that like?
It was difficult. We can navigate at sea, but on land it's all different. If you go in a straight line, you've got to go over a mountain and all those. So we had to be taught the basics. So they sent us off to Infantry Training Centre for 6 weeks, just to, learn to shoot and learn to do all the things you needed to do. And then we went there and they had an abridged course for us because they just knew, we get lost. So it was easy to just have us marching around with big packs on the roadways and things like that. So, we had to prove ourselves. That was the key. SAS soldiers aren't ones who just give you a big hug and let you get in the job. But once we built up that trust, we became a long-serving part of them. And now we have a clearance diving group of about 30 with the 2 commando doing counter-terrorism in Australia, basically. So, we're still doing it.
Well, it's the elite of the elite, as they are described, special forces. And then you'll work with them. Was there an acceptance of a sailor, a Navy clearance diver coming in?
Took a while,
yes. Because this was in the early time where there was that transitional period.
We were kicking down doors and blowing stuff up, and one of the reasons they brought us in was really, for them, diving was a method of getting to the job. But we were professional divers, so they needed that. When we started diving the oil platforms and things like that, they needed that extra capability. Now, they probably could outshoot us for a while, but we could outdie them. But we became such a good team over many years. Started in 82, and we were there in the 90s, and then we transferred over to Commando, so still there.
But that level of trust that you must build up within the unit and within your colleagues, it must be quite extraordinary, because lives are on the line at times.
You've got live explosives, you're running into a room, there's live rounds going around you, you've got to be sure that the person behind you is going to shoot in the right direction. It's as simple as that. And if you don't have that trust, you can't do it, because you'll be looking over your shoulder. And they're small groups, so you can't do that. You just got to get on and trust. And we do.
Trust. It's transactional too, because
of course.
The Navy brought skills that
of course.
The Army SAS didn't have, and so there's that transitional aspect of it. And I think you're absolutely right. The trust side is imperative.
And it's not just what happens, within the barracks and on the battlefield. I know there's a couple of personnel with 7th Brigade at the moment who are pretty excelling on the sporting field as well, Major Scott Hill.
We do. We've actually got good representation. We've got a couple of representatives in the Wallaroos. Louise Robinson, I seem to recall. We've also got a State of Origin player. We also have... I'd have to check my notes. And so there's some really good representation across the board, and they get a lot of support from Defence.
Well, how wonderful that they can continue a sporting career. A number of female personnel that you see on screen there from 7th Brigade who have excelled on the sporting field as well. This has been the 2024 Brisbane Anzac Day Parade. I can't let you leave, Commander Peter Tedman, without asking about the time you met now King Charles III.
King Charles III on a couple of occasions. We met. I was at the regiment, and because we knew he was coming, they gathered officers and some awardees together, but I wore my Navy shoulder boards specifically so King Charles would know that I was a fellow Navy person. So he kind of walked, you can see in this photo, he kind of walked past me, but he turned around and smiled and said, "What's a Navy guy doing here?" And I'd actually practiced this a few times, and I said, try to add a bit of class to the place. And from that photo, you can see my CO is sort of standing in the background, and he's not sure whether he should smile or give me the daggers or whatever. But he thought, King Charles thought it was funny, so I was happy.
The moments you have that you probably were never expecting when you first enlisted in the Royal Australian Navy. It's always such a privilege to host our coverage of the Anzac Day Parade, 109 years on from the landings at Gallipoli. Thank you so much for joining us. You can watch the parade again on ABC iView and through the ABC's YouTube channel. A big thank you to our commentators today, Commander Peter Tedman, Major Scott Hill. Thank you so much. And today's march has a special significance here for us at the ABC, as we recently lost our dear former colleague and veteran Ian Mosey, better known as Joe or simply Mosey. Leading seaman Ian Mosey served in the Royal Australian Navy for 8 years, seeing 222 days of active service during the Vietnam War. To all veterans, serving personnel and their families, thank you for your service, and lest we forget.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget.
A shoreline was never invaded. A country was never in flames. This is the calm we breathe. This is a feeling too strong to contain. Still it aches like tenderness. It reads of politics. Signatures stained with tears. Who can remember? We got to remember the hardest years, the darkest years, the roaring years, the fallen years. These shall not be forgotten years, the hardest years, the wildest years, the desperate and divided years. We will remember. These shall not be forgotten years. each other, sing to you now. Oh,